Good morning. I'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to order of the Governor's Emergency Medical Services and Trauma Advisory Council. Good morning to everyone. The first item that we have is the first item is our vision and mission statement. And our vision is a unified, comprehensive, and effective EMS trauma system for a healthy, safe Texas. And our mission is to promote, develop, and maintain a comprehensive EMS trauma system that will meet the needs of all patients and that will raise the standards for community health care by implementing innovative techniques and systems for the delivery of emergency care for the entire population. And now we'll move to the next item on the agenda, and that's the approval of minutes from the May meeting.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. Under Chair Report and Discussion, I have a few items. First of all, GETAC procedural rules ask that we have a vice chair, and in keeping with the tradition of having either the vice chair or the chair of physician, I have selected someone or volunteered someone, there's plenty of folks here on this council that would do a fine job, but we've selected Dr. Greenberg here will be the vice chair. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Oh, why is he laughing?
Also, our thoughts and prayers are with Dr. Eastridge as he is deployed far away serving our country. I got a note from Jody that he would not be able to attend due to work demands. The other item I have is, among some others, is, and I don't know if Director Guerrero was going to cover this in her report or not, but we need to find out if the council is okay with not getting paperwork anymore and using the guidebook application.
I would prefer it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm seeing some nods that we'll do away with the tree killing. Did you want to know about for committees as well? Or?
This is the first time we opened it up to committees, so we can ask the committees if they would. I mean, we don't print for the committees.
Okay.
We put the things on the website, and people can go and pull what they want.
Okay.
We've just tried the guidebook for the council.
Okay.
And the PDFs will stay on the web, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So people would have two options, and so they can either pull it off the web in PDF format for a PC or a Mac, or they can use guidebook for Android and iPads and that kind of stuff. Right?
Correct. Now, we've not shipped out the guidebook to all of the committees yet. We wanted to. We get 200 free downloads, okay? So we were trying it out for the council and for the internal staff because we're trying to go paperless. I failed miserably. I have a piece of paper. And then we were going to, this is the first time that we sent it out to the committee chairs so that they could start using it. And we're kind of tracking how many hits we get and how many downloads we get. Because once we go over that 200, then we're going to have to start paying for it, and it's relatively expensive. So, yes, it's going to be available. To what extent, I don't know right now.
But at any rate, for those that may be listening in and those in the audience, all of the documents are still available on the website in PDF as they always have been.
Correct.
Okay. We're just talking about reducing a little bit of your staff time and effort in making all these copies.
Correct.
Okay. All right. I think you got general direction from the council. Also, the next item I had was late last week. I received a letter from the Panhandle RAC, their executive board, and the discussion, it was too late to put it on the agenda. In essence, they have some concerns with their particular part of Texas and rural and frontier EMS, and also in terms of the placement of people on some of the GETAC committees. So what I'll do is I will forward this one way to all of the council members, and if it's okay with the council, that their specific concerns were the appointment of personnel on the some of the committees, and then they've also asked that the Education Committee of GETAC have an agenda item, which would be in the future, of course, for current education problems and issues in rural and frontier areas of Texas, and specifically go out and seek stakeholder input from those areas. So my short comments don't do justice. It's a very nice letter and very much appreciated. This is what the council really exists for, is to get this kind of stakeholder input. So if it's okay with the council, I'll respond in writing back with just a short explanation of how the committees are selected, and then we'll make sure that their concerns are put on the agendas that are applicable. Is that okay? And while we're on the committees, it's that time of year again, and so Director Guerrero will be covering in just a minute how you apply to be on a committee, but I want to take just a few minutes and explain how the committees are selected. There may be some who don't realize that we get lots of applications for some committees and we get almost no applications for other committees. And what will happen is, in some date in October, Dr. Greenberg and Judge DeLoach and I will come to Austin, and we'll sit in a big room for a day, and Director Guerrero and her staff will put maps up, and they will show all the counties and all the RACs, and there's pins, if you will, in the map that shows where all of the existing committee members are from and where all the applications come from. And then we get on the phone, a conference call with the committee chair, and we constantly look to make sure we have a balance of urban, rural, and frontier. It's not easy, but it's important that the stakeholders know we don't just pull names out of the hat. It's quite an extensive process to try to maintain that balance of those areas on the committee. We rely very heavily on the input and advice from the committee chairs themselves. So, more than likely, if someone wants to be on a committee and has put in an application and they've been in a lot of constant communication, either by attending those committee meetings or by showing a lot of desire and input with that committee chair, they're probably going to move to the top. That doesn't necessarily mean they'll be selected, but it does mean that they have the attention and have shown the interest, as opposed to a stakeholder who may put an application in and no one even knows what they look like. They didn't include their picture on the application or anything like that. So it's a very well thought out process, and DSHS staff does a great job of preparing those maps just so we can try to balance things out. So we encourage everyone to apply, but again, any stakeholder that wants to serve on a committee really needs to become active with their chair, with that chair, and make contact with them and let them know of their desire and interest. And if you don't get in this year, reapply every year. We have people who've applied to get on the committees 3 years in a row before they finally get a chance to get on there. So I just wanted to restate that the process does take quite a bit of work, and we don't take it lightly. We have a lot of great folks that want to serve on the committees, and we're very thankful for it. Unfortunately, we just can't get everyone on a committee, but we will pay particular attention, as we do all the time with rural and frontier. And lastly, speaking of committees, one thing that we fail to do sometimes is say thank you. So for all of the stakeholders who participate, whether you come to these meetings or come to committee meetings or you're on the committee, the council thanks you very much for your effort, your time, your work, as well as DSHS staff. It's a great process, and we thank all of you for your dedication and effort. We're going to kind of jumble things up just a little bit, and we're going to start with Assistant Commissioner Dave Gruber first with his report.
Good morning, and good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for accommodating the schedule here, so I appreciate it. I'd like to go over 3 things that I have written down, but then, of course, entertain any questions you might have. Actually, it's 4 things, but in about 3 categories. The first has to do with the future of the RACs. There's been comments that I've made, and I'll claim comment to them, or I'll acknowledge those comments, about the possibility of an RFP for the future that might change how things go. I do want to clarify that. I'm not taking anything off the table. However, our desire is not to have a new RFP for the RAC. However, our desire is definitely a look at what's going on out there, accepting the fact that the funding issues are significant, that we have a model that we have to decide whether or not that's the appropriate model to move forward with, and we have to look at the system and make sure we're doing things right and that we can sustain the system either with the funding we have or with alternative methods. So I do want to clarify that there is no intent right now to put a new RFP on the street for the RACs. However, There will also be a concentrated effort that include the RACs, include stakeholders, to determine what the future is for that. Again, everything's open, but the whole purpose is to make sure that we maintain the vision that you've mentioned as far as a trauma system and EMS system second to none, that we're able to support the missions of the EMS and trauma system, and that we coordinate both internally and externally. And along those lines, there's been a concentrated effort between Assistant Commissioner Perkins and I to be more involved together in speaking with the RACs. We intend to have a series of meetings that include RAC leadership and hear their vision for moving forward. And again, everything is open so that we make sure that we do things the right way as we move forward, but also, again, recognize the constraints we have fiscally as we do that. So I would like to ask if there are any questions or clarifications expected of me before I move forward.
Well, what exactly do you mean by putting out an RFP for the RACs?
Right. Particularly related to the HPP grant and to the designation of which organizations would be the leadership for the RACs, and particularly for the EMTFs is the way the RFP went. Again, no desire to do that. There is absolutely no pleasure at all that anyone gets from the RFP process. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite. So if there's any way to avoid it, we will do that. However, as I mentioned, I do not want to take anything off the table. I want to make sure that during this time of stress, fiscal stress on the RACs and on our emergency system, that we make sure we do things the right way. And that's the sole goal, with absolutely no hidden agenda by anybody that I'm aware of. The second thing I'd like to discuss has to do with an initiative that we've started, and Dr. Greenberg has been on that initiative, or is on that initiative right now, and it's our Crisis Standards of Care initiative. Didn't mean to scare you, don't worry. So, but along those lines, if the chair would permit, I'd like Mr. Bruce Clemens to describe that, as he's got the more details than I. So could I ask him to step up to the microphone, please?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Last year in June of 2013, Dr. Lakey signed off on an initiative requiring us to start focusing on crisis standards of care. And so we started off by researching what other states are doing and doing a comprehensive lit review. Then we brought on facilitators, the Leidecker Group, and started forming a panel, an advisory group, and a group of SMEs. And those kind of three legs of the stool met last week. The initial meetings are really focused around just laying out what our cross-cutting themes are. For example, ethics across all of our other documents, behavioral health being addressed across all of our documents. But the next step on this is we're going to have this one document that's going to be an overview of kind of the lay of the land in Texas, including enabling and barrier legislation, some of the ethical principles we need to abide by, and other things. So it kind of lays out the groundwork. But the next part, which is really the engaging, most interesting part, is we're now forming 4 work groups. There's EMS, hospital, alternate care sites, and state and local government, primarily public health. And so we are recruiting now for those 4 work groups. And by the way, thank you, Dr. Greenberg, for being part of our panel. Appreciate that.
I thought I got another work group added. So.
No, but if you're welcome to serve if you'd like. But I'd like to throw it open for anyone here. I don't know the best way to get that back to me, but if we could have a single contact where anyone who's interested in serving on one of those 4 work groups could. The work groups are EMS, hospital, alternate care sites, and state and local government. So we're in the process of identifying 4 chairs for those work groups. I've taken a lot of emails and recommendations now, so I've got a list started. Now, we can't accommodate everyone onto every group they may want to serve on. The same thing that you all have with your committees, same kind of challenge. But we want to try to have these be as robust and diverse as we can as well. So anyone here who is interested in serving on a work group, you're certainly welcome. Those work groups over the next 4 or 5 months will be developing a draft document, which will be an annex to that framework document that we'll have in the next 30 to 60 days. And each of those annexes are going to address things like triggers and indicators, legislation that needs to be changed, things like that. So it's going to be a very interesting process. I think the way that we're approaching it, it's taking time, but it's very comprehensive. When we're done, I believe we're going to have the best crisis standards of care guidance in the country. So the rest of the agenda, or the rest of the schedule for the project, is over the next 4 or 5 months, the work groups will develop those 4 annexes. Then we're going to reconvene the big group, review those annexes, and get comment on them, change them up some, and then we're going to start a stakeholder and public outreach process. So anyone who doesn't serve on a work group, you're going to have plenty of opportunity to weigh in on this, because we're going to have a dozen meetings at least across the state. We're going to engage stakeholders, bring in EMS, hospital, and others, get those folks together and get their input. But we're also going to have some of the time also designated just for the general public. We're going to invite the media and have these open conversations now rather than try to explain these standards during a crisis. And so that's it. We're hoping to have that engagement piece done and the documents final by the spring of 2016.
You mentioned the 4 categories and repeated them again. All of us up here represent various stakeholder groups. Is there a website we would tell them to go to find more information or put their name in to be on the work group?
I can get some information together and get it to you.
Okay.
I think we're developing a specific mailbox for that, but I don't have that yet established. So I'll go back and get that information and share it with you all.
Okay.
And then you'll have a single place, a crisis standards of care work group email that everyone can forward their request to.
Okay. Thank
Okay?
you.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions?
Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. The next item I'd like to discuss, and this was this is not a personal desire. This is an input from questions that we asked representatives from the community as to what might be presented here. And so I can give you my experiences with it, but the issue is whether or not there should be standardized hospital emergency codes throughout the state. My experience is that in New Jersey, we did that through the Hospital Association, but to put things in perspective, in New Jersey, the total number of hospitals was probably equal to the Dallas-Fort area, not the Dallas, even Fort Worth area. So it was a very limited number of facilities compared to what's in Texas. And even with that, I think there was probably 70 to 80% initial agreement on all the codes, and then there was variation in some of the others that made it more difficult. So I'm just putting it on the table as far as if there is a desire to do it, we could look at ways to make it happen. I think the reasons that it gets put on the table is that particularly in the way business models are now, you have people who do go cross-facility as far as their employment and can have to learn different codes based on the facilities they go to. Again, it's something that if you're interested in it, we can look at how to move forward. But it is something that I was asked to bring up.
You're talking about, for example, a code red is the same in any hospital you go to?
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't the my mind's not working. The accreditation for hospitals, don't they have a standardized code? Or no?
I'm not familiar whether they
Okay.
do or not, but I don't believe so.
What's the word I'm thinking of? For the accreditation for hospitals? No. JACO. That's what I was thinking.
JACO. Joint Commission.
The Joint Commission.
Yeah.
So you're talking about in-hospital codes that are called overhead that mean like somebody's arrested and those kind of things?
Code blue, code silver, code yellow.
Okay.
And again, there's a group that you could probably say throughout the community it's the same. But then there's a different group if you have an active shooter, if you have an emergency where everybody has to go to the same place, but you don't want someone to know about, that's been called, those type of things, and those do vary. Again, in principle, it's a good thing. In practicality, it was difficult even with a group of about 70 hospitals to get total agreement with. It's on the table for discussion, obviously not something that has to be decided today, but something that I was asked to bring up.
Has anybody talked to the Texas Hospital Association about it? THA would be to me, the obvious resource for that.
Okay. We have not engaged them with that. The last thing I do want to discuss has to do with Sunset, and the good news, bad news is, the good news is they did not address at all EMS trauma, with the exception of the regulation of EMS. But when I talk about it from the way I'm looking at it, they didn't look at how to necessarily improve the system, support the system. It was more the regulatory side of the system. The bad news is that they didn't address it. The good news is they didn't address it. It's mixed feelings about it, because sometimes it does provide the openings for support to a system. Other times it goes the other way. But I did want to recognize that both with other than the regulatory aspect of it and with emergency preparedness, there was no addressal of it in the Sunset report. So there would be no impact that we would see in the future from Sunset on that. So with that, that's the conclusion of the items I had on my agenda, but if there are any questions or thoughts that you'd like to ask me, I'm available for that.
Not seeing anything.
Great.
Thank
Again,
you for
Mr.
your
Chairman, thanks
report.
very much for adjusting the schedule.
You bet. Thank you. We're going in reverse order, so we'll go to Director Villanacci.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for giving me this opportunity to bring you up to speed on what's been happening with the trauma registry. We've had a few changes in the program area. Mainly, we've added some staff. We've added an epidemiologist, recently hired a new customer service staff member, and we have another staff member for training that will be starting September 1. I've also recently hired Dr. Heidi Boyes, who's in the audience here, as our new unit director. And Heidi will be the one, she's right now reviewing the applications for the manager position over the branch that manages the trauma registry. So we should have that position hired fairly shortly. Our current staff, even in the absence of having that manager, been working really hard and really fast, and they're an excellent staff. They've been trying to complete the goals we have for this year. They've been mainly working in three main areas since the last GETAC meeting. One is registry reports, one is customer service, and the other is just basic system improvements. I'll quickly address each one of those areas in terms of some of the activities that we've had since the last meeting. With respect to registry reports, working with stakeholders, our staff have produced new and updated 2013 summary EMS, hospital, submersion, and pediatric reports. These reports provide snapshots of the data that's currently being reported to the registry. I believe that hard copies of these reports were provided to some of the committees this week, committee chairs. However, they can also be found on our webpage if you're interested in finding them, and they would be under, quote, new 2013 reports added. So if you're interested in finding that, go to the injury webpage at the DSHS website and look under new 2013 reports added. Since our goal is always to produce reports that are both informative, beneficial, and useful to you and the public, our staff are always open to input and comments on any of the reports you see. So if you do look at those reports and see things you'd like different or changed, please contact our staff. They would love to hear from you. With respect to customer service, staff have been working and identified and addressed several issues. Of course, our goal is always to improve customer service. We did have a couple of things that came up in the last since the last meeting. One of the major issues that we found was that we identified was registry lockouts. And there's nothing more frustrating than getting locked out of a system. I know I hate it when it happens to me. This is where users were locked out for various reasons, anything from forgotten passwords to incorrect passwords and so on. The problem was, in order to get back in, they had to contact our staff, and that wasn't the most efficient process because it took time to get that done. To address the issue, we made changes to the system so now that registry users have the ability to reset their own passwords. Okay, so we've eliminated the need for them to contact our staff for assistance to do that. So they have more control over that. Since the last meeting, our customer service team has recorded 245 new customer service requests, all of which have either been closed or are now actively being addressed. So they're working hard to provide good customer service. Of course, we always continue to ask people to, contact us with problems. One of the issues we had where people were contacting or calling individuals, and that's okay, but sometimes if individuals aren't there or if individuals are on vacation and you leave a message, it's not going to get addressed real quick. And for emergencies, if you know people there, keep calling until you get somebody. Otherwise, we'd prefer people provide us that information or contact us through our injury web email address or through our toll-free number, which is available. So both of those are checked multiple times a day, so they will get addressed fairly quickly. For system improvements, we're pleased to announce now that the hospitals that use web data entry, they can now enter both NTDB and the Texas Custom Required questions, so that's been done. However, we've delayed deployment of the new hospital XML file upload for hospitals that submit data through a third-party vendor until September. We've delayed that for several reasons. One is we want to complete the 2014 NTDB and Texas Custom Questions and all data rules implementation before we actually get that done. And we want to allow the completion of the new submission feedback report. This is to give stakeholders better information on their file submission errors and warnings and provide it in a more straightforward and understandable, readable format. So we want to make sure they have feedback quickly on that. And it's also to allow us to provide better customer support and information with respect to stakeholder submission questions. As always, we're going to continue to work with hospital vendors on our deployment plans for the new submission process. We're still working towards NEMSIS certification and expect to have that completed this fall. It seems to have been a moving target for us, but I think we should have that done this fall. We're in the process of implementing an NTDB file extract that web data entry users can use to send their data to NTDB on a scheduled basis. And a NEMSIS file extract also is being developed so the state can send the EMS data to NEMSIS. One last item, as some of you are aware, we recently received a notice of award from TxDOT. We applied for TxDOT for funding for next year. We received a notice of award for fiscal 2015. We actually haven't received the money yet, just the notice, but this is to continue registry improvements. As always, I'd like to thank you for your support of the program and the trauma registry, and welcome any and all feedback on how we're doing. So, thank you. Any questions?
You mentioned the TxDOT. I guess it's a grant.
Yes.
Is that relied upon every year to sustain the registry, or is that extra just for improvements?
That's extra for improvements.
Okay.
Yeah. It's been helping us with maintenance as well right now, but it's mainly for improvements. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Next is Office of EMS and Trauma Systems Coordination, Director Guerrero.
Thanks, John. Okay, Kathy sends her regards. She is not sure if she's going to get here today, so I may hit on some of the things that she will cover, assuming that she gets here later today. As we were speaking earlier, I'm trying to go paperless, so I'm going to see if I can do this. In your packet, you do have a hard copy of the funding report. And you also have a schematic of the funds. It's a flow sheet. I like to put that in there to numb your mind so you can't follow what I'm saying. I'll let you get to it. It kind of gives you a breakdown of the different funds that fund EMS and trauma systems. No, Vance doesn't have one.
Nope, I have one.
You do? Okay. All right. Good. For our trauma designation program, we're at a high right now. We have 281 designated trauma facilities in the state. We have something like 20 that are in active pursuit. So that means that we've got 20 in the pipeline to come online for designation. If all of these facilities get designated, remain designated, we're going to break the 300 mark. That'll be the first time in the history of our system that we've done that. Okay.
What % of hospitals is that?
Well, there are a little over 600 hospitals in the state, about 625 to 30. So that's pushing the 50% level. Now, obviously not all of those 600 hospitals have the services needed for trauma. Okay. That would include the special hospitals that don't have an OR. Okay. For stroke facilities, we're up to a total of 129. We're holding relatively steady there. The level 1 facilities have been coming online. We're up to 11 now of the comprehensive facilities. Let's see. For the 3588 monies, or the uncompensated trauma care, that disbursement, we have to do the true-up with the standard dollar amount coming from Medicaid. That process will start after the close of this fiscal year. The other funds for this, for 14, let me see. Sorry, I got lost on my paper. Oh, okay. Fiscal year 14 funds dispersed the week of June the 30th. So that's gone. For fiscal year 15, for the uncompensated trauma care application, we're going to put that out and make that available to facilities in October 15th. We're actually going to give them more than 90 days to fill it out because of the holiday time and get it back into our office. Okay. We're still doing the shift of funds to HHSC for the Medicaid program so that they can bring down additional dollars. So that the plan is still to bring down that additional $34 million that will go into the fund for the trauma hospitals. Y'all have any questions on how that works as far as SDA funding? No? Okay. I think, pardon?
I could ask, but I'd still be confused.
Well, then I probably didn't explain it very well.
I think the best thing about the document that you said is mind-numbing is it really does show how complex this is. But if you look at it long enough, you can figure it out and get a better idea. It's just when we only talk about it, and even the report you give, which I really like, it still doesn't show how complex it is and how many different lines go different places.
Absolutely.
So I really like that.
It's difficult to give a straight answer sometimes when you're asked a direct question. And I know that can frustrate people sometimes. One of the things that is on the funding report and that we track pretty carefully is the emergency fund for the extraordinary emergencies, or the EFs. This year, each year we have $1 million available for that fund that's set aside, and different EMS providers can ask for those funds. It needs to be an emergency. We look at for a degradation of service in the area before we fund it. If we don't feel like that there's a degradation of service and it doesn't really rise to the level of an emergency, then that request may be denied at that time. But when we get toward the end of the fiscal year, we go back and we revisit those requests to see if those providers still have a need. If they still have the need, then we will fund those requests out of that $1 million. We've been going through that process in August, and we've actually funded an additional number of EFs. So the paper that you have in your packet actually needs an update. We've funded 10 EFs to date for fiscal year 14, and we currently have a remaining balance of a little over $500,000. There are at least 2 more requests and providers that we've gone back to. We haven't had responses back from them yet. If they still have the need, then we will go ahead and fund those. So this may change between now and actually the end of the fiscal year. Okay. Do you have any questions on this funding report? Good, my plan worked on that flow chart. Okay. I do want to talk to you a little bit about the process that we go through on contracting, because when we contract with particularly the RACs, we have to go through a contracting process internally. This year we had some challenges because the process changed. We didn't change the process, but we now have oversight by HHSC through our contracting process. And so it changed things for us. It was a learning process for us. It was a learning process for them. So it really put our contracts back. As an example, EMS County, EMS RAC contracts normally start in May, and so the RACs would have had those in hand. They actually went out this week. It was a very hurry up, get them signed, turn them around, get them back to us. We needed to have them executed by yesterday in order to get the funding to them before September 1. You know, the state kind of shuts down their funding. We shut down all our processes at the end of the year to do that closeout. Our state fiscal year starts September 1. So there was this hiatus period for next week. We were trying to get those done. So staff in our office, Indra Hernandez and Linda Reyes, are names that you will recognize, were phenomenal at getting this done. Wednesday, Indra was literally driving back and forth to the main campus with contracts in hand, having them filed, that they were fully executed. So it was kind of a Herculean effort. We on our side, what we can control, we're going to start about 4 months earlier in our process. We normally start around January. We're backing that up to September, October. We're going to start the process that we need to do in our office to try to be sure that we get these things on time next year. So with that, that really concludes the funding issues that I have to discuss. Any questions before we leave that topic?
Jan, I have a question.
Yes,
The
sir.
uncompensated trauma, is the percentages set? What percent goes to which faction? Because I see that EMS 1314 got less than about 2%, and the vast majority goes to the hospitals. Is that a percentage set?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And you'll see that on that flow sheet. It'll give you the breakdown of the percentages, what goes to RACs, what goes to hospitals, what would go to EMS providers, and what the department pulls off for administrative. Okay. Okay. I do have some new staff to introduce to you. Elizabeth Stevenson is the designation program manager. Stand up. Yay, yay. You may recognize Elizabeth. She was a designation coordinator with us for a number of years. She decided she wanted to go off into the private sector, and she did that for a while, and then she was coerced into coming back. No, not really. She decided she wanted to come back. We are thrilled that she is here. She has a long history in acute care. She's worked in emergency rooms and administration. She has taught. She's been an EMT. She's been a certified educator. She's worked at Memorial Hermann in Houston, it's a big level 1, and then she's worked in the small rural level 4s also. So she has a vast knowledge of how our trauma system works. She's very even-keeled, doesn't get excited, and I'm thrilled to have her. Robert Friedrich has also joined us since, I believe, since the last meeting. Robert is standing right. Stand up.
He did.
He did? Okay. I left the eyes in the back of my head at home. So Robert has joined us. He took over Colin's role as the program coordinator for the regions. He's worked with in DSHS since 2009. And he's also worked in the healthcare system in the private sector with Seton, mostly in the financial areas. So we're thrilled to have Robert, and he's getting to know the regions and the RACs now. That concludes the staff staffing update at this point. The next part is that I wanted to talk to you guys about the revision of Chapter 157. We are continuing to develop and edit the current language, utilizing the suggestions that we had gotten from the committees. And someone reminded me last night that it was a long time ago, and I said, yes, I'm aware. So we are using that. We still get some suggestions that come from the committees. We still take them. The plan is to have a generalized stakeholder meeting. I'd very much like to have it before the November GETAC, so that we can get the feedback on where we're going, and then possibly have the committees look at that draft, an edited draft, in November. This is all really determined by how productive my staff and I are at doing the draft and getting it out. Some of the most significant changes for the trauma piece is that, I don't know if, I'm sure some of you have looked at it, but on the trauma side, the trauma rules have attachments. So you go to the rule and you're reading it, and unless you know there's an attachment, you're not going to get all of the requirements. The attachments are going to go away. Everything will be in the body of the rule, so it will be a single document. We don't have that type of setup on the EMS side, so that they won't see that type of a change. Okay. For EMS, the state moratorium for the new provider licenses, that expires September the 1st. As of close of business last Wednesday, we had not had any new EMS provider applications. The application has been revised. It's on our website now, so it has all of the new requirements that were related to Senate Bill 8, and it's there for use. Joe feels like that the applications that we get will be better, that it will prevent some of the just I don't want to say fly by night, but that's the only word I can think of right now. The applicants will be serious about being in EMS. One of the things that Joe was talking to us during some of the meetings was that before we put these things in place for SB 8, he literally got a call from someone who was interested in opening an EMS firm. And the individual asked him, what did BLS mean? And so that's probably not the kind of the folks that will be applying now. So that's just an example of some of the calls that he would get. The administrator of record that's required in SB 8, we're going to have an administrative record course that's going to be held at the November EMS conference. Joe has worked very hard on that to get that running. The medical director course is an entry-level orientation for medical directors, and that course will be available beginning September 1. It's an online course that will be taken. There's 7 chapters or 7 modules to this course, and then the 8th module is actually Texas specific. Dr. Greenberg and Dr. Beeson were very gracious in reviewing and helping Joe develop that. It is free for the first year for any medical director to go online and take that. You don't have to be a physician to take it, but only the physicians will get a certificate at the end of the course when they take it. Did we find out on the CME yet? Okay. One of the questions that came up yesterday about that was, does this course give CME? And we're not sure. We've asked the question, will they produce a CME certificate at the end of the course? And once we have that answer, then we'll disseminate that. After the 1 year free, then the course will be available, but it will cost anywhere from, right today it's $300. It might be $400 next year. We don't have any control over that. And this is, okay. So that really meets the requirements that we had to put in place for SB 8. Any questions?
I would like to clarify that when you say that Dr. Beeson and I helped Joe, that means Joe did 99% of the work. So Joe really gets the credit for this. Even though he's out of the room, Joe should get all the credit for really doing that big part of the module for the online course.
He did a great job with it. And
Bobby's a little wrong. Joe did 99.9%.
okay. All right. That really concludes my report, unless you have other questions.
Noticed, I think the level 1 trauma designations, there's 17. I don't want to dig through my papers. Is that, it looks like it's been that way for a year. Have we pretty much probably maxed out on level 1s for a while?
Probably so. Level 1s are at 16.
16.
Level 2s are, the highest level are pretty stabilized. We have a couple of facilities around the state that are trying to upgrade to a 2. There's one here in Austin, there's one in the Valley, and there's one other. But predominantly the level 1s I think are finished out.
Thank you.
Okay.
Did your report include Commissioner Perkins' report pretty much as well, or if she shows up, we can
I
refer
did
back to
not.
her?
She was going to talk about sunset and some of the legislative issues.
Okay, thank you. Right, next on the agenda, we have a report from the Preparedness Coordinating Council, Eric Epley.
He did not meet, sir, but I can do my other report.
Sure. I was going to ask you to do the disaster committee anyway, so.
Well, then I'd like to do what you asked me to do. Good morning. I'm Eric Epley from the GETAC Disaster Committee. So we met Wednesday morning, had the EMTF updates from Victor Wells, who always does a great job. Lots of stuff going on with the EMTF program. I testified to the Homeland Security Committee. Joe Pickett, Chairman Joe Pickett, and the other committee members received that well. We talked about EMTF and the lack of funding with the federal cuts, and then discussed having core GR funding for that, which they were very interested in discussing further, and asked us back to bring an AMBUS. And so the following month at their next meeting, we brought an AMBUS and some of the other team members, and they got a chance to walk through that, and it was really well received. The EMTF groups across the state are meeting with their legislators to kind of build core loyalty and support for that as well. We have built a notification system so that any AMBUS or any MMU, any other asset that's moving is notified from CAD to the SOC and to the SMOC. So we have system-wide notification capability across the state with any of the EMTF assets. We have signed the air medical MOA, so now the air medical agencies are now signing up with EMTF as well. So now we have AMBUSes, we have the MMU field hospital, we have the ambulance strike teams, nurse strike teams. Recently added the medical incident support teams and ambulance staging managers, and finally the air medical component. And we're pleased to say that AirVac Life Team, CareFlight, San Antonio Air Life, ETMC, and REACH Methodist Air Care have already signed and in place, and I've talked to almost all the other providers at a meeting, 2 or 3 meetings here, and they have those on desks being signed shortly. Today, if we had to, I think we could roster 10 aircraft with almost no problems very quickly if we had a real crisis. We are doing MSAT, the mobile satellite radios that TDM has really taken and pushed forward in all their units. All the EMTF assets have the MSATs as well, and we're doing monthly radio checks, and pleased to see that moving forward. The AMBUS listserv, we had the vendor who's made the AMBUS for many years that we've all bought. In fact, FDNY bought 29 of them. right? There's about 150 of them across the state, across the nation, I'm sorry. They're going out of business. And so that made us a little concerned. And so there's a national list server now. All AMBUS owners, TDMS is hosting that email list server. And we're going to have a 2-day pre-conference at the Texas EMS Conference, the first ever national AMBUS conference. We have a 2-day agenda putting together. We're excited about that. We also, with respect to Sarton and them going out of business, have had conversations with some of the large people who do refurb and manufacturing, like Frazier, like Siddons, like Pierce, and we're getting a lot of interesting responses. We feel like we're going to find someone who's going to want to pick up that service line and move forward, especially with respect to maintenance. Dr. Kidd briefed us on TDMS, the Texas Disaster Medical System process. They're working on mass fatality management. The TMORT team, if you've heard of that, they're going to be a response team to be able to do mass fatality capability, and they're working with the medical examiners' offices across the state. Those teams are being formed, and they're going to be moving the training for those teams into the university setting shortly. There's a medical countermeasures group that's working, and they're putting out a survey to kind of get a state of the state where we are after 10 years or so with respect to medical countermeasures. We spent a great deal of time on responder health and safety. There's a work group that's been dealing with that, and in some ways they started heading down a path that I felt my personal belief is we were starting to encroach on where the employer's responsibility as opposed to a deployment. If you're on a state deployment, what role does the state have or the employer? To that end, I think we're going to be adding those requirements to the MOA. So when the employer is signing up and saying we're going to respond, we will list very carefully what, this is austere conditions, this is what we're expecting, here's the conditions. You're not going to want somebody that's on medications that are refrigerated, for instance, right? So we're trying to get that into the MOA, which will start being rewritten in the spring. We're going to work on a video called So You Want to Deploy. And it's kind of a brain shark online training thing. They get an hour or two before they apply for the teams. They ought to take that so they know, wow, I'm going to be somewhere that there's not going to be a lot of help available. It seems obvious, but apparently it's one of those things we need to brief up. And finally, we're putting in a checklist in place similar to how Texas Task Force 1 does it, so that there's a screening process, and those team leaders are saying, hey, did you get all your it's a checklist. If you got it all, we do it really quickly. If you don't have it, you're going back home to get your blood pressure meds or whatever it is. Crisis standards of care, I think Bruce covered that pretty well. We're glad to see some of our committee members are going to be picking up the EMS portion of that. So we had, I think, 2 or 3 people that contacted me and wanted to be recommended to that, which I've passed that along. And long-range planning, we want to make sure we have funding. Like I said, through the Homeland Security Committee and other efforts legislatively, we're going to, we've ridden the federal grant dollars for a long time. This is an essential part of our disaster response in Texas, and it's got to be funded, and we can't lose ground after $15–20 million of investment. Relatively minor amounts of money are going to keep that program rolling for the next foreseeable future. We're also going to bring up another issue, the core reliable funding for hospitals. You remember in a disaster like in Rita, Katrina, Ike, we receive patients at non-affected jurisdictions. And we have reimbursed those healthcare systems sporadically and in a wide range of, one time we went after a block grant that they had a social block grant to be able to fund that. We need to have core, reliable, consistent funding. If a hospital is helping another jurisdiction in Texas that's hundreds of miles away and it's impacting their business, are those patients going to be funded or not? The NDMS system, the federal system, tells you it's 150% of Medicare. Every patient we bring in from NDMS, it's going to be funded 150% of Medicare. And so the administration signs that with some reliability. They're not going to be saddled with real financial problems by trying to help. So we want to just reimburse those costs effectively and reliably and consistently. Finally, one of the local fire chiefs had a really great idea. I don't know how we've missed this after 10 years. We really have not put together a good state guidance document with respect to COOP planning for a fire EMS system if the disaster is yours. We've done a great deal of planning how to respond statewide, and there are some really good toolkits and other things about that, but we think we need to consolidate that so the disaster committee can give an EMS agency, if you lose a third or half of your workforce, what are the steps in place that you need to be thinking about? Again, sort of a checklist or a toolkit to work through, and so we're going to be starting working on that. We're excited about that project. Any questions?
Eric, I got a question. So, working with the task force, obviously, is there emergency planning going on the veterinary side? Because you know that during these crises, the patients that we have obviously are affected by their other family members on various furry legs. Is there collaboration, or do you know if there's anything in the state from the veterinary side to work collaboratively with us when we deploy in emergencies, or is that, should I withdraw everything I just said? I mean,
So there's been some discussion with inside the A&M system.
sure.
So the task force leadership has had some discussion with them, but there is a team,
Yes.
right? And they've been.
We've
I don't
deployed
think
with
the cross pollination is as strong as maybe it's a little bit where we were with EMTF and the task force, say 4 or 5 years ago. And we've realized if you think about EMTF and Texas Task Force 1. It's a little bit like fire and EMS. It kind of goes well together. Having fire guys and paramedic guys, they work in the same station, that kind of stuff. It was a natural linkage. And where we've seen the task force deployed on hurricanes, and we bring patients back out of those areas and having EMTF assets to take those patients and start treating them rapidly, and that integration, especially at the command level, has been fantastic. I think that's another gap. That's an opportunity for us.
I'm
that we ought to
not
start.
trying to relate to what the task force is. I'm just thinking as all these MOUs exist and we start talking about disasters. I mean, you've been there. That's a huge piece that
Right.
that strains down our resources that
Yep.
we're not prepared to do.
They're not ready to leave until everybody's leaving.
That's
The
right.
whole family's leaving.
Any other questions? I had just one.
sir.
Just out of curiosity, if all the task force were to deploy all at once using everyone in the system, how many total people would that be roughly, you think?
Yes.
So the ambulances alone, there's 200 ambulances theoretically. So that's 400 medics plus another, 50 supervisors. MMU is 35. You kind of.
You can swag
I'm
it.
from Louisiana, so go easy. I'm doing 35 times 8. You guys give me a break. You got that number. Some other guy there's some A&M grad that's going to help me quickly, right?
265. It's 265 or 255.
280. So, all right.
So give me a
I
number.
don't feel
plus
nearly
or-
as bad. Jeff and I, we're good. We're safe.
plus or minus 1,000's okay.
Yeah, I think plus or minus 1,000 is a good number. The MMU, MIST, and ASM, the ambulance staging managers, all that stuff. If we have a big hurricane, it's going to be close to 1,000 people.
And I bring, there's a purpose in me asking that question. I think it's a very, very impressive system, and it's a tremendous achievement and goal that Texas has as a resource, as a tool to deploy, and there's a lot of people involved in it. And I know that the disaster committee and you have had a lot to do with that, so thank you for having that ready to go.
I appreciate that. I'll keep my organizational skills better than my math skills. Thanks, sir.
Right, next we'll have the Air Medical Committee. Shirley?
Good morning, and thank you. First off, I'd like to thank Eric Epley for his work with our committee in getting the memorandum of agreement taken care of for the air medical providers. One piece of that MOA was the fixed-wing reimbursement rates. There are no published fixed-wing reimbursement rates, so we're going to be working to put together a schedule of reimbursement rates for the fixed-wing providers that we'll add to that MOA. And there was a little bit of holdback on a few of the programs in signing that because they didn't have the reimbursement rate for the fixed wings. So we're going to work towards getting that put together and then get it added. We also still need to put together our work group of air medical providers to work with EMTF, so we had a little discussion on that. We had a presentation from Mr. Schmieder regarding the work being done on a national level to eventually have states participate in compact licensure for the medics. That would allow them to go work in a compact state, similar to the nursing compact, allow them to go work in a compact state on a temporary basis without having to go through the whole licensure process in that state. There's certainly some requirements for that. They would all have to be National Registry states, requiring National Registry for licensure, those kind of things. It will take some legislative action, and for Texas, that's not going to, we will not be prepared to present that or for that to go through the legislative process in 2015. So it'll be several years down the road before this is completed, but it's been some really nice progress from the report that we got. And hopefully we'll have that in place one of these days. It would allow, like I said, for temporary work in other states, some education in other states, trying to get rotations done and those kind of things. So looking forward to eventually getting that done. I think it'll be a big help as far as the medics go, trying to go across state lines and helping. Just a couple of things I'd like to bring up for the conference. There will be a day-long educational classes that'll be sponsored by the Air Medical Group. They will be critical care topics, and it will be open to air and ground providers. That will be on Monday. It will be in the exhibit hall and all day long. They've got some really nice classes prepared. Also, the Texas Association of Air Medical Services, TAMES, which works closely with the Air Medical Committee, they're having a golf tournament at the Top Golf facility there in Fort Worth. If you have an interest in participating, let Brock Miller know, or let me know, and I'll get you in touch with Brock and get you a team signed up. Last year they did Top Golf because the weather rained out their golf tournament that they had scheduled, and everybody seemed to enjoy it, so they chose to go back and do the Top Golf tournament again. There will also be a silent auction in the exhibit hall, and we would encourage all of you to either donate items or go by the silent auction and bid on the items. And that's really all I have. Thank you.
Any questions for Air Medical? Thank you. Next, we have Cardiac Care, Dr. Smalling.
Good morning. Our Cardiac Care Committee met yesterday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Everybody was present except for Lonnie Den, who is attending the wedding of her daughter, so we thought that was a reasonable excuse. What we did was we reviewed what the committee's done since the first meeting in February of 2009, trying to get an idea of what are successes and what are things that haven't been done. Common themes emerged. The data on regional STEMI care is important, but not all the RACs have a robust data collection and reporting. Pre-hospital data collecting is a challenge, to say the least. Very few STEMI patients receive reperfusion therapy within 120 minutes, which is really the critical time for saving myocardium. And in fact, the average in Texas and across the United States is 180 minutes or more. Pre-hospital ECGs improve STEMI outcomes, and transfers from non-PCI hospitals take way too long. In-hospital mortality in STEMI patients remains unacceptably high. It's above 10%. We know we can get it to 3% or less. And so those were things that pretty much popped out. The following priorities were all voted on and passed unanimously. And they were, there's a need to provide a framework for STEMI Referral Center and STEMI PCI Center designation, redesignation, and de-designation. And there needs to be a QA, QI standards for STEMI centers. There's a need to establish and maintain a statewide STEMI registry, database which is compatible with NCDR and action registries and includes pre-hospital critical information. We don't know and probably won't know whether it should be blinded or unblinded for feedback on performance, and the trend now is for unblinded feedback. we will require designated STEMI PCI centers to participate in the state and national registries. And the last thing that we felt was important, that there needs to be mechanisms for standardization and potential funding of STEMI care and EMS units, including 12 lead ECG machines with capability of transmission to STEMI referral or receiving centers, and this should be required. And there should be capability of stocking and administering advanced pharmacologic agents for STEMI care, including fibrinolytics, antiplatelet drugs, and other drugs as identified for pre-hospital STEMI care. This is going to be a key piece to get the reperfusion time under 120 minutes. Ann Robinson of the GETAC gave an update on the Action Registry for Lonnie Den, and the highlights of it, is, from my perspective, is that 87% of all the PCI centers in Texas are participating in the Action Registry, which is pretty good. It's probably driven out of competition rather than anything else. The STEMI mortality, cardiogenic shock rates are higher in Texas than in the rest of the nation. And then, as we stated, the symptom onset to reperfusion time still greater than 180 minutes. Dr. Robert Wozniak reported on his DISH's CVD and Stroke Council interactions and introduced Carla Granado and Kieran, and I can't pronounce his name, unfortunately, but he was an epidemiologist for DISH's, and they talked about the STEMI data collection for the RACs and activated and funded by Rider 97 of Senate Bill 1 last biennium. They said that 21 of 22 RACs have executed contracts with DISH's to participate in the data collection and analysis. 76% of the RACs share data with participating hospitals. 1/3 of the RACs collect pre-hospital data of some sort. 60% of the RACs have administrative help for data collection and analysis. During the public comment period, Catherine Bissell of CETRAC shared the data survey on non-PCI hospital performance, and that will be posted on the DISH's website, the GETAC website. Finally, a motion was made concerning the potential acquisition of source data on STEMI patients from the NCDR by the DISH's group, which needs consideration. So this is a proposal for consideration. It's our understanding that patient-level data from NCDR on STEMI patients may be obtained by DISH's as part of Rider 97, Senate Bill 1. The Cardiac Care Committee requests that a governance for STEMI data analysis and distribution be established with members from the GETAC CCC, DISH's CVD and Stroke Council, and other acknowledged experts in CV disease data analysis, as well as members of the DISH's Health Promotion and Chronic Disease Prevention section. Furthermore, this governance should be established prior to any data download from NCDR. Whoa.
Yeah.
That's a big chunk.
It's a big chunk. That's the, yeah, well, that's the proposed motion.
Okay, so what we will do with that is it will be on our council agenda then in November.
Okay.
In a, however you'd like to word that motion, and we'll put it on the council agenda, and then we can discuss it. So if you have
I will submit the minutes, and it will be detailed in the minutes.
Okay.
I'll do that this week, or the coming week. The only, I guess, there is, as you can imagine, some significant concern about unblinded data being available and potentially accessible by folks that shouldn't have the data, and so we were hoping to try to protect that. And if there could be some sort of intervention with DISH's to make this concern known so that that data is not dropped until we have the governance, that would be helpful. So,
What about I'm not as familiar with it, except that I know that there's a Texas cardiovascular work group of some sort. I'm hoping you know what I'm talking about. So,
no. Yes. So the Texas Heart Attack Coalition, is that what you're talking about?
I don't know.
But
I know that
that's
there
what, so there is a group, we'll be meeting this Friday.
Okay.
We'll discuss this further. But, you know, there is the CVD and Stroke Council as well. So we had a discussion after the meeting yesterday with some of the parties that are involved. And we'll do our best to try to keep a lid on it until November.
I guess my question is, a general question in life is why another committee? But why do we need another group?
So the database, okay. So why do we need a database governance? So there is a lot of data out there.
Right.
There's a lot of interest, commercial interest in the data, as you might imagine, but there's a lot of interest in objective and vetted use of the data. So it's felt that a group of people that have experience in objectivity and should be involved with it so that the data doesn't just get distributed randomly in an uncontrolled way. This data, the vision is the data would be shared by DISHES, by the GETAC, and other interested parties, and the RACs, so that we could get a better idea of how we're doing and where we need to go. So.
I think this is a very, very complex and potentially explosive issue. We have a couple other, councils, committees at the state level. We have lots of stakeholders in this because there's money involved.
Right.
I would request, if GTAC's going to consider this, we need a very detailed, and I know it's a lot of work, but we really need a detailed proposal, including what other resources already exist and why those can't adequately do what you're asking. If we're going to request another committee or council or whatever this is to be formed, there'll be a dollar value on that, and it sounds like it would be expensive, to be honest.
Well, is there a dollar value on all the people around the table?
Yep, there sure is.
You get paid? I don't get paid.
I don't get paid. But
Okay, I don't think there's a dollar value.
well, it takes the state's time. And it does take our time.
Well, that's another issue.
Yeah.
And the funding is being developed through private sources at the present time. And the idea is that as this matures down the road in some biennium in the future, that once everything's in place and funded privately, then the state can assume that cost.
Now you just made me worry more. Because you just mixed private funding and public funding, and now I worry more.
Yeah, we're going to do what it takes to get it done initially.
So, like I said, I think this is a very complex and potentially divisive issue. And that's why you're wanting it. Just like you said, a lot of people want access to this data for different reasons.
Right.
So I don't think this is something we can easily go into.
Well, okay. I will distribute the minutes, and then I assume they'll be considered in the November meeting. We can discuss it further. Yes. We have a request for comments.
Well, I have a couple other. You went through a lot of other stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
That our charge is to advise the state on rules, and you went through several things that are potential rules, like requiring a 12 lead capable or a 12 lead with transmission capability in an ambulance. That's not currently in the rules.
Right.
That actually is something that we would need to consider as to whether or not we recommend to the state.
These are all things that we felt were important that we're going to consider, continue to discuss and agree. I think it's a rules issue,
Mm-hmm.
and that was discussed tangentially as well.
But that's truly our charge, is to advise the state on making rules. So,
We understand.
okay.
I know there's, not sure how to handle this. I know that you'd like to make some comments. Is it something that can be made during just open public comments? Okay, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Remind me, throw something at me when we get there.
Any other questions?
No.
I just have one question.
Yeah.
You said the in-house STEMI mortality is 10% for the state. That just shocked me. It's just terribly high. What's the national average?
10%.
National average is 10%?
10%.
And the state is?
10%. It's 11 or so percent. But it's a little bit higher. It's certainly not less.
You said the goal is 3%?
3%.
Okay.
And that's achievable. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Smalley.
I don't,
I'm sorry.
I'm over here. I'm sorry. I had a comment about Dr. Greenberg's question. There is another group. There's the Texas Cardiovascular and Stroke Council has a steering committee. And that steering committee is made up of people around the state that are specifically wanting to partner with GETAC related to the work that they're doing. They're largely using community health workers. I'd never really heard of that group before, but and it seems to be that they are predominantly education-based. They want to do preventative education as well as post-MI, post-stroke. But they do have funding, by the way. But I was just wondering if, since they want to be involved with us anyway, I was wondering if they couldn't maybe be approached about some of the things that we would like to see retrieved. I don't know if they're in that business at all or not, but just a thought.
Okay, thank you.
Are you, Ms. Karen, are you talking about the CVD Council?
And the steering committee that advises them.
Okay.
They usually meet on the same, usually they meet on Friday and then the council meets on Saturday or vice versa, but they attend the meetings and provide their recommendations. And we have committees, there's an EMS committee, tobacco cessation, post-MI counseling, all that.
Dr. Rutledge is the chair, and Dr. Rutledge is the chair of our stroke committee.
Oh, well, good.
Yeah.
Didn't see that bus coming.
Well, I'm on the steering committee.
Okay. We're going to skip Education Committee and go to EMS Committee. Dudley Waite. We will give the Education Committee report. We're just, Dr. Greenberg's going to give it when he gives his medical directors.
Good morning. EMS committee met yesterday morning at 10:30, and we had almost full attendance. Got an email yesterday morning that one of our members, Jorge Rios, had opted to resign. He had some changes in his work commitments and offered up his resignation. He wanted to step aside and leave appropriately instead of allowing the attendance thing to get to him. So we appreciated that. We thanked him during the meeting. We did a lot of review up front. Talked to Mr. Schmieder about the upcoming rules and the end of the moratorium. We talked about the stakeholder report that we did from Senate Bill 8 and some of the things that had come out of that, and asked Joe for an update on that. We got an EMS for Children update. We talked about the rule changes that that Jane had just mentioned a little bit earlier, and then we also talked and had conversation about drug shortages and pharmaceutical compounding. We have that on our agenda every quarter just to discuss if anybody has best practices or they're seeing shortages in their area of the state, just so we can bring that up to make others aware. And then we got to our update from the Trauma Systems Committee Registry Work Group, and for the first time in years, actually had a very long, protracted discussion. Staff from the EMS and Trauma Registry were here. They got up at the microphone, and we had a very good discussion with them about some of the issues EMS providers are having, some of the things that they've now got in place, and some of the technology issues that were challenging them that they've gotten corrected. And so we had a very good discussion with them about that. They shared an email address and phone numbers and protocols and what expectations of the stakeholders should be when they call in with a question or need help with their account or whatever that is. So it's very, very good dialogue back and forth. And so I appreciate their staff being here for that and being a part of the EMS committee and helping us in that discussion. We've got an EMTF update, and then we also talked about the extraordinary emergency funds. And Jane and Joe both updated us on the fact that they're going back and reconsidering old applications, which we thought was appropriate. There is still an issue, and we'll probably talk about it again and just carry this agenda item forward to November, because there is still an issue with those funds that if they're not all spent, the ones that aren't spent do not go back to EMS in any way, shape, or form. They go to uncompensated trauma care for the hospitals. And so there's a broad feeling in the EMS, by the EMS stakeholders that normally attend, that maybe there could be something or some discussions about where those funds could go legislatively. That might have to be the way that gets changed. But before anybody even contemplates that, we thought, well, what would be a better place for them if it's not where it's going currently, which is uncompensated trauma care. So we'll probably have that discussion and carry on with that in November. We reviewed our work on the GETAC strategic plan. We met Tuesday of this week, the day before GETAC started, and then we recessed and met and continued our work on Wednesday to get through the entire document as Dr. Eastridge had laid it out for us. And we have pretty significant things that I think that we've brought. I'll wait till that part of the meeting to see exactly how you would like that delivered to y'all. We need to do a little cleanup on it, but I think probably we have a Word document. We just expounded on the Word document that Dr. Eastridge supplied to us as a starting point from y'all's last strategic planning meeting. And so I think we're prepared probably just to submit that to you. And then there's still some holes in there, and when you read through it, it may cause some questioning, but we really took it to the point where we thought it'd be better, instead of plowing on through into the darkness, that we bring that to the full council and then engage in your deliberations as you go through those recommendations from the different committees as to why some of that was, and then expound on some of those points in a direction that the council feels that should go, instead of plowing off down a path and then you guys going, no, that's not the direction that we think it should go, and we've wasted all that time. So, a lot of hard work on that by our committee, and we had several stakeholders come in and sit through different parts of it. And then we reviewed the recommendations of the Sunset Commission, and we thanked I thanked my committee as well as the stakeholders that were watching on TV and the stakeholders in the room, because almost all of those recommendations by the Sunset Review Commission regarding EMS and EMS fraud came out of the stakeholder meetings and the report that we delivered to y'all last November. And so I think they did a good job of listening to how the industry felt the industry could be changed, and made some very good, solid recommendations for change moving forward in their 5 recommendations. And then lastly, we got an update from Joe about EMS patient care reports. And the need to get together and work on how we make sure those are being delivered to the hospital in accordance with Chapter 15711 that requires some type of report at the time of patient drop-off and the full report within a business day. And we basically thought that maybe we get some folks together. I know medical directors discussed it. I think it also went to Air Medical. Although EMS committee is more than willing to start tackling that, we also thought maybe again, instead of plowing off into the dark, that maybe we get a little coordination with those other 2 committees to make sure, and then, we're willing to take the charge on that if we need to, like we have in the past, and reach out not only to hospitals but to other stakeholders to try to really kind of figure out what the problem is in different areas across the state. Because I believe Joe said it, and he'll talk to you about it in a little while, I'm sure, but it is a statewide problem. But it is also a multifaceted problem as to why that's not occurring. So unfortunately, it's probably a lot tied into technology, and sometimes technology is our best friend, and sometimes it can be a very, very good foe against us, and when we're trying to do the right thing. So, but the EMS committee is prepared to take that on with the guidance from GETAC, and that brings me to a couple of agenda items that we discussed that came up either during open comment or related to that. One is the discussion on EMS patient care reports. We'd like that on our agenda in the future. As I said, we're willing to take that charge. And then in our public comments, some comments were made about a couple of issues that some agencies, some ground agencies are seeing out, especially in the oil field areas where there is a perception that some air medical providers are going direct with the oil field companies and encouraging them to call the air medical providers directly, potentially, I don't believe intentionally, but potentially subverting the 911 system. And so the ground providers are very concerned about that for a whole host of reasons. If there is not some type of contact made with the 911 system, then you don't get what the 911 system brings you, which is law enforcement, fire, and ground transportation. So if there's issues with extrication, if there's issues with where they can land versus where the patient is, if there's mechanical issues, if there's weather issues, all those things that can come up when we're bringing an aircraft into a scene, now we're caught flat-footed because the ground provider, the fire department, the other resources that would normally be there off a 911 call are not activated. So we've reached out to Shirley with the Air Medical Committee. She believes that it's a topic worthy of discussing. And an idea that we came up with was that our committee came up with is we're going to look when the schedule comes out when we get ready for November and see if we can do a little swapping of meeting times and butt up ground and air together so that we meet one after the other and then spend 30 minutes in each of our agendas and have a joint meeting between both of us and hammer out that issue a little bit and talk about it. So, but those are the two agenda items we wanted to bring to y'all for carrying forward with.
Any questions? So the issue on patient reports, is they're not getting done or they're not getting untimely, or yes?
Yes.
Okay. And that's something that you're asking for your committee to work on?
Yes, we're willing to take the lead on that. We're going to need input from medical direction. We're going to need help with air medical. I mean, it's not just the ground guys. I mean, it's a system-wide problem that they're not getting either to the hospital in time for patient care to make a difference in patient care, or they're not getting to the hospital at all. I mean, it's however you can dream up that they're not getting a report is what the problem is.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give up my age, but at one time the run wasn't over till the paperwork was done, and you didn't leave the hospital till the doctor or nurse had a piece of paper, and somehow we've transitioned a long ways away from that. But I always wondered what if the doctor needs to check and see what was done in the field in an urgent way, and it's not there, so I think it's a timely thing, but I think it's a technology issue. And then the other thing that y'all were going to work on is the issue, the oil field helicopter bypass.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the council just needs to let you know it's okay to put that on the agenda. And I'm not seeing any negatives, so go ahead with that.
Okay.
Any other questions for Dudley? Thank you.
You bet.
Next, we'll have injury prevention, Shelley Stevens Stidham.
Good morning, everyone. The Injury Prevention Committee had a workday meeting on July the 25th in Fort Worth, and at that time we discussed the EMS and trauma strategic plan, and we came up with 6 injury prevention objectives and some corresponding strategies to meet those objectives. So we just have a few wordsmithing things to do, and I don't know who we need to send that to, but I can send that next week. I don't know if Jane, Starla, Vance, Dr. Greenberg?
Yes.
Okay. Then we also met, we had a regular meeting on Wednesday, and we had updates from TTCF and TTAF. TTAF will be planning their injury prevention course that they've done. I think this will probably be the 4th time. They're planning it to hold it in February in conjunction the same week as the regular GETAC meetings. So we'll provide more information about that at the November meeting. We also had a presentation from the Children's Hospital Association, who have done a qualitative study of childhood unintentional injury prevention activities that are taking place in Texas. And so they had interviewed quite a few people and made some recommendations on mostly about coordination and collaboration and things like that. We had some discussion around that, and what Chat said is that they will probably be trying to follow up and try and convene some organizations to get together to see what we can do to maybe have a more cohesive and collaborated injury prevention effort in Texas, particularly around childhood injury prevention, but those of us who do adults as well think that we can also kind of tack on adults with that. We also had a presentation from Courtney Edwards, who's on our committee and works in the trauma department at Parkland. She had implemented a program that we had discussed at one of our meetings. It's a CDC program called STEADY, and I can't tell you what the acronym stands for, but it's basically to identify people who may be at risk for, older adults who may be at risk for falling. And Courtney had taken the CDC program and implemented it in the Parkland trauma department and had followed up and evaluated it. And she's gotten a lot of she's presented this at several national meetings, at some statewide meetings, and it's actually gotten some attention from CDC. But they've had some really good results. Even 1 year of data shows that they've been able to reduce length of stay and increase the number of patients who are discharged home as opposed to some other facility. So, that's always money for hospitals. And so she has 1 year of data now, and she's hoping they're just trying to finish all the analysis so that they can have 2 years of data. And she just sent that to Colin to put on the website, so that presentation will be available next week. We finalized the hospital-based, suggested hospital-based injury components document that we've been working on this year. And the supporting materials, and we voted to approve it. We just have a few more wordsmithing things, and I can send that out next week. But this is something that we want to put on the GETAC Council agenda for November, and I will send that to you all for discussion and approval. Again, we're not asking for any rule changes. We're not asking for these to be regulations or anything like that. These are just suggested components of a hospital-based injury program, and like I said, we provided supporting materials. So I think what we're asking for is the council's approval and endorsement, and so I'll get those sent next week. And at the last meeting, I'd mentioned that we had passed a workforce development position paper and that I would get to you guys, and I neglected to do that, to have it on the agenda for this time. But I will also send that for your consideration for the November meeting as well. And then finally, we had several announcements about some statewide trauma conferences and some national injury and violence prevention conferences that are coming up. Any questions?
Any questions? Thank you, Shelley.
Okay.
And next we'll have Education Committee, and Dr. Greenberg will be reporting for Jody.
Yeah, I was in the Education Committee just a little bit, and I don't know why Jody was mad at me, but he asked me to give his report. If there were other members that are here, if I misspeak on something, please feel free to correct me. They did meet yesterday. First item they discussed had to do with advanced EMT, or going from Texas EMTIs to advanced EMT, since that's the new verbiage in the standard per National Registry. I believe Mr. Schmieder was part of that discussion as well, and I think that is clarified. I don't know that there's further action needed at this time.
Yeah, it's going to take some requirements in legislation because it's not recognized there, and we've talked about some solutions at that meeting in the upcoming rule revisions. So as of right now, we look at the advanced EMT is the same as the EMTI, and that's the education standards that we're using. Excuse me. We're going to fix it, and we're going to work together on making that happen.
But is there anything for GETAC to do on this? No. Okay. All right. I guess that's what I meant by there's nothing further to do. Nothing for us to do. There's work to be done, but not for us.
Correct. At this time, anyway.
Okay. All right. And then they also discussed community health curriculum for community paramedicine. I think that actually does take some rule changes as well, as some, if that's going to be recognized as an entity, but I don't think that's on the plate.
Yeah, they're putting together a 3 to 5 year plan on moving this program out, what kind of education is required. It depends how you look at it. At some levels, it's not an expansion of skills. It's just expansion of knowledge, so it may not require, it depends on what's happening. This is a big issue, not just in Texas, but nationally. Everyone's trying to wrestle it, and we have some really great programs in Texas. So they're pulling all that information together from the organizations that are doing it now in Texas and trying to come up with a template. But it's a 3 to 5 year work in progress.
Okay. And then the final item, it looks like they worked on not so much yesterday, but they had a work group session prior, was looking at the trauma EMS plan. I'm not going to go through the changes they recommended, but they have several changes that they recommended within the document, and we'll forward those to whoever we decide to forward them to. And I believe that was it, looking through his notes, that would be appropriate for a report. Is there anybody else that was in education? Did I miss anything? Okay.
Okay, thanks. Medical Directors Committee, Dr. Greenberg.
Okay, so switching to medical director, we met yesterday as well. We had only 2 agenda items. One is the one that Dudley referred to prior about leaving patient reports. We'll discuss that later in the GETAC agenda. A majority of our meeting was going over the trauma EMS plan. We literally sat and went through, I won't say every page, but we went through the document and made recommendations that will be forwarded on to the council. Also under public comment, and I look at this as, quite frankly, a success. Todd, and I'm going to mispronounce your last name, Haugen, brought it to our attention that the previously approved spinal motion restriction and use of long spine boards was not on our website. I emailed the state, Phil, Joe, and Jane, and as of today, that is up on the web. And it's actually, we're looking at having a page just for position statements as well for GETAC. So I see that as a success. I was impressed with how quickly the DSHS was able to respond and to get that done. So that document is up as of today. And that's my report.
Okay. Any questions for Medical Directors Committee? Seeing none, we'll move into Pediatric Committee. Dr. Macias.
My name is Jorge Sainz. I was asked by Dr. Macias to come and represent him. He could not attend. I'm also a member of the Pediatric Subcommittee. So we actually met on Wednesday morning, and we discussed several items. We still have not found a representative from the Child Fatality Review team, after Susan Rodriguez had left. So we're still, looking for the liaison between the Child Fatality Review team and our committee. We discussed a little bit about the position on minimizing CT ionizing radiation, paper. That probably will be submitted to GETAC sometime next year. So it's not a pending item. We discussed also the Pediatric Facility Recognition Program. There's been actually 2 webinars that happened early on a few months ago. We will continue to support that item, with consultation support for the development of those particular recognition programs in the state of Texas. There is some other states that have acquired these strategies, and they show obvious improving mortality and in outcomes, for those emergency rooms. We believe that the major impact is going to be on non-children's hospitals, affiliated emergency rooms, and that's actually where probably most of the children are being seen currently in the state of Texas. Sam Vance, I believe, he's going to give us an update in a little bit as far as, the Children's State Partnership. We also discussed the update on the pediatric transfer guidelines between interfacilities. That document is being passed around between other subcommittees. There has been some additions that we did and recommendations for the identification of child abuse before, pediatric transfers, and there are some other suggestions as far as, how to utilize more pediatric specialty transports when available to provide enhanced care for children being transported. This is for non-trauma and trauma, transportations and transfers. We also discuss an update on the state of Texas Emergency Assistance Register. The STEER program, we think that the number that is being reported for children that have disabilities, or the identification of those children through their homes, is not being represented. So we believe that there is an access problem with the register as far as people being adopting it, and there are several barriers. We're also going to be exploring another program that is currently being used in Fort Worth. It's called SNAP, where actually the EMS providers, before they actually get to the home where the children have special disabilities or special needs, they'll be identified before they actually get there. So we're going to be discussing that in the near future. And we're also going to be meeting sometime in the near future to discuss the GETAC strategic plan for the pediatric subcommittee. So that as a whole, I open for any questions.
Okay. Any questions?
A couple of questions, Jorge. One, is the trauma committee working with you on the ionizing radiation effects on kids, that policy, statement at least?
Pretty sure, I think Dr. Macias is handling that, but I'll make sure to send him an email to make sure that remind him.
And is there any outside agency or group also looking at this? I don't know what it would be called, the Texas Radiologic Association, anyone? So
yes.
They have feedback and...
So they, in order to change or make an impact, for the future, they will meet for legislation changes in 2017. So they meet every 4 years, and we missed it in 2013 as an opportunity. But we'll hopefully try to make the major impact, for minimizing ionizing radiation in children. There is lots of different, agencies, and we have tried to enhance their websites, and to have that documentation available for the providers, but it seems to us that the best way to enforce it is by hopefully trying to change the legislation and hopefully to influence the manufacturers of developing and having available these pediatric-friendly programs, for that hopefully will minimize the exposure of minimizing radiation or ionizing radiation to children in the future.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
All right, stroke, Dr. Rutledge.
Hi, I get to talk about a lot. The stroke committee met Wednesday afternoon, and here's my following report. We had an update from the Texas Council of Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke. And since that's an issue, I wanted to talk about what is the Texas Council of Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke. I became the chairman of it last summer, so I've only been the chair about 1 year. The Texas Council of Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke is a governor-appointed council. It consists of very specific categories: cardiologists, stroke doctors, family doctors, DSHS personnel, lay people, and its charge is to better care for cardiovascular disease and stroke in the state. It sort of stands in between the Department of State Health Services and the legislature and reports it's a liaison back and forth. As GETAC, we also have a relationship with it in regards to the cardiovascular group as well as the stroke group. So if you guys remember, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've vetted a way to go about getting data to produce a gap analysis to then marshal funds so that we can get more funds from the legislature. And this was specifically targeted for RAC, or a RAC-centric approach, because we thought this would be the best approach to get more money, and it's the best organizational system. If you remember, we approved at this council the stroke component of the questions that we were going to ask, and the STEMI and other components came through the cardiologist and the cardiovascular people, Dr. Wozniak being one and Dr. Hillard being one. Wozniak is on this cardiovascular committee here. To reassure everyone, that information that's being gathered is devoid of PHI information. It's also fuzzy, so it's not hospital specific, it's RAC specific, or to give more of an idea of urban, suburban, rural areas. And the guess is that we need more support, more money for the rural and frontier areas so that we can get more money in that regard. So no PHI, no individual hospital identification. If there are hospitals or people who are specifically worried about that, I would suggest they would spend their energy better trying to make their organization better than worrying about somebody pointing a finger at them. In regards to that information, the RAC surveys have already gone out, and some of these things are just like surveys of what the current policy is or what they're currently doing, and the idea behind that is that we can then use that information and share between the RACs to create best policies so we can improve service to our citizens. Preliminary data from this is coming back. They're trying to correlate some of this by September 1st to have it ready for the legislative session. That information, this is the Rider 97 money going to the Texas Council. That information will then be distributed to the RACs, to our council here, as well as the legislature. And so I invited Dr. Smalling to come to the meeting as well. It sounds like most of the concerns can just be remediated by this is not what's going to happen, and as always, communication is an issue. So that's the Texas Council Cardiovascular Disease Report. Do you guys have specific questions about that I could address? Because I didn't really see it as a GETAC issue. I see it as more of a council issue.
Yeah, well, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you, and I don't know if Dr. Smalling is still here or not, but what he was talking about, is that something that you can do through the Texas Cardiovascular Commission?
I think it's already done.
Okay.
It's just, I think it's fear from people that, somebody's going to show their dirty underwear. But there's no intention to do that. This is a regional gap analysis project, ultimately to then go back to solicit funds for us, the RACs. And if you have dirty underwear, I think you should go wash it. But we're not going to be, right, waving it around or anything. That's not the purpose.
And what's the name of the group again? I'm sorry.
Which group?
Texas Cardiovascular Commission.
Oh, it's the Texas Council of Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke. There's a big web presence. This has been around a long time. Other questions? Okay. Also part of Rider 97, funded through the Council of the Lone Star Stroke Consortium, which is, by my words, a research consortium. They're starting to do research projects. One of the research projects that you might be interested in is NASCARE. It's a NASCAR-like look at how stroke care can be sped up in the emergency room, similar to the way people refuel and change tires on a NASCAR. And so they have several projects that are ongoing as well and have several $1 million to do that. Next up, Carla Granado from the DSHS gave her update on the RAC data collection process, which we've already talked about, but that information is starting to come in. The other thing I would add is very early because the contracts just got done, and so most of the things that are coming in are just the survey components. rather than actual data, run data, for example. Next came up in our council that also sort of ties into this Rider 97 is the Texas Council of Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke is also looking at hospital-based information, and they're using Get With The Guidelines, which is an American Heart Association designed data collection tool, and they're using that. We are using that tool to then look at, again, gap analysis in regards to the stroke centers and ways that that can be improved. It was recommended, but not passed, that we might use that as the recommended database collection tool for stroke centers in our state. Issues with that was, though, that because that's a proprietary database and people are using other databases as well, that it would be better to use specific components of the database, and then people could use multiple databases for reporting. And so a subcommittee was formed to specifically pull out the database metrics that would be important to us, specifically be the pre-admission and the admission components, because these other databases also deal with what happens in the hospital and what happens after the hospital. And from a GETAC perspective, that's really not our thing. So that committee's in place. The next discussion item that came up was use of the Brain Attack Coalition's new standards for stroke-ready hospitals as criteria to approve certification programs for our Level 3 stroke support facilities. So to remind you guys, in our state, to become a approved, to become a designated stroke center, you go through a certification process, and that could be Joint Commission, it could be DNV, it could be HVAP, it could be Joint Commission. There are multiple organizations that can certify a stroke center for primary comprehensive center, and then the state then designates them. The basis that we used to say if the certification was okay was the Brain Attack Coalition's recommendations for comprehensive stroke center and primary stroke centers. In our state, we also have a Level 3 support stroke facility, which is more the rural and frontier areas. And we're very lucky TTAF developed the criteria for that because there were no national criteria. So what we're saying now, because we have Joint Commission and all these other people wanting to come in and also certify the hospitals in addition to TTAF, that we should go to the same national standard we used for the others to base our decision or recommendation to you guys if they're okay as a certifying agency. So one of our action items is a recommendation to the council that the Brain Attack Coalition standards for stroke-ready hospitals be accepted as a basis for approval of the certification program of Level 3 support stroke facilities. So that's our first action item. The next discussion item was, if you remember last time, I brought up that we made a recommendation that 4 hours of stroke-related continuing education be required for recertifying EMS personnel, and that was reaffirmed. To give you background on that, the State Stroke Act, which was Senate Bill 330, about 2005, the recommendations were that all EMS providers be trained in the Cincinnati Stroke Scale, that all EMS providers receive training and recognition in the emergency care of stroke, equivalent to training received in the current ACLS Case 10 stroke scenarios. Now, this was back in 2005. that EMS providers have documented familiarity with the stroke center certification and emergency transport protocol in their RAC, that recognition and documentation of stroke training be overseen by the medical director supervising the EMS personnel, and that current ACLS certification be recognized as sufficient documentation of that training for the supervising medical directors. The idea in the recommendations was to make it as easy as possible on the medical directors. The way that that was put into the TAC, into the actual rules, was that, and I'll just read it off, that the guidelines consistent with current standards be developed, implemented, and evaluated. Individual agencies and medical directors may and are encouraged to exceed the minimum standards. Stroke patients will be cared for by health professionals with documented education and skill in the assessment and care of stroke through their pre-hospital and hospital course. Stroke patients will have their medical care as documented by pre-hospital run forms, hospital charts reviewed by the individual's medical director for appropriateness and quality of care. And stroke patients will have deviations from the standard of care addressed through documentation of stroke performance improvement process. So to fulfill our mandate in those two requirements, that's where we came up with a recommendation that we told you last time, and that we're rebringing back again as an action item. And the action item is recommending that the EMS that the action item is that EMS recertification require up to 4 hours of stroke-specific content continuing education, that this would be part of the 4-year recertification cycle currently required for EMS, that these hours would be in lieu of existing general content time and not assigned to stroke-specific content time, and that this would not add to add any additional hours to recertification. So that's sort of the background and the recommendation. We're also working on a medical director's packet to facilitate and make this easier for them. We already have a preliminary, but I don't have that to show you at this time. So that's the second action item. Next up, we have a transport bypass work group. And just to remind you again, so the original Stroke Act was that paramedics were to take patients to the highest level of state-designated stroke centers in an available region or adjacent region to the highest level of care, the highest level designated stroke center, with no more than a 15-minute delay. So that was a recommendation. The rule that got put into the Texas Administrative Code was that in regards to bypass protocols, that guidelines for emergency transport of patients who are eligible within a time frame of the United States Food and Drug Administration approved stroke care therapies, which is 8 hours, be taken to the highest state designated stroke center. So in the actual code, it just says taken to the highest level center, but it doesn't, and then the recommendations were 15 minutes. Well, what's happened is stroke care has evolved, and and because we try to recommend and do stroke care based on the individual RAC you're in, which is pretty different if you're frontier versus intra-urban, and we have multiple designation levels now. Some people are looking at doing a transport bypass based on the severity of stroke. And the similar analogy would be if you were in a car wreck and you broke your finger, you might go to a level 2 trauma center versus if you had multiple fractures, you're going to go to a level 1. And so we have established a subcommittee that's going to work on correlating the current transport bypass plans that are out there in RACs, come up with some models for people to do as well, and that's in process. Okay, like I said, long tail. The Trauma Systems Committee Register Work Group had no updates. We had an endovascular presentation by Dr. Kirk Conrad on the rapid improvement of endovascular care. It used to be when people did stroke care by pulling clots out from an endovascular approach, it would take an hour, and with new techniques, it's dropping down to 15 minutes, 12 minutes, so that's rapidly improving versus the average time for TPAs, like an hour or longer. Public comments. I brought this up last time, but just everyone please know that the Texas Cardio-Neurology Conference by TTAF is September 26th at Hyatt Lost Pines. Our next meeting will be in Fort Worth, November 22nd at 2:30. So that's my report. You probably have lots of questions. Please fire.
Go ahead. The 4-hour CE, where does that number 4 hours come from? Is there any evidence that that's the hours needed? Because most of the things you mentioned, the stroke scale and recognition of a stroke, really doesn't change. And I'm somewhat confused because you said in ACLS counts. Are you saying 4 hours in addition to ACLS? Or?
No. Let me read it again so I get it right. It wasn't my subcommittee. That recertification require up to 4 hours of stroke-specific content continuing education. That this would be part of the 4-year recertification cycle currently required. The hours would be in lieu of existing general content and assigned stroke-specific content time. This would not add additional hours. So my memory, which may be a little bit fuzzy on the subcommittee's report, was that that they'd also talked about different that the medical director might do different numbers of hours for someone who's a paramedic versus someone who's just an EMT versus someone who's just a first responder. The original recommendations were when we were trying to fulfill the education requirement, we wanted to make it as easy as possible for the medical directors because they were supposed to at least check that off someplace. And so because the ACLS training has stroke training within it,
right,
the idea was, well, then that's already done. You don't have to redo it.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, so if you'll excuse me, I paraphrase what I think you've asked to be on the council agenda for November.
Yeah, we have it in writing, so you can add that, use that, but 2 action items, yes.
Okay, so it was the brain attack standards, and then
Correct.
it was the EMS certification and CE education that we just talked about.
Component, yes.
Component, okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Rutledge.
Okay, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Trauma Systems Committee, Jory Klein.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members.
Good morning.
So the Trauma Systems Committee did meet yesterday. We actually had a strategic planning work group in San Antonio in July where we really focused on the Trauma Systems Strategic Planning document led by Dr. Eastridge. We have several work groups to give you an update. The registry work group met yesterday morning, and so in that registry work group, the EMS group, these are the action items that they asked for. They asked for clarification of when the NMSIS 3 would be implemented. In addition to that, communication with the vendors. And then I think you've already heard a little bit about this, but the business associate agreement, so if they're having a billing company send their data in, it needs to be recognized from that billing company. So, I'm just a nurse, but it doesn't make sense to me that you can send it to the RAC and the RAC can send it in for you, but they can't use their billing company to send that in. So those are some of the issues that are being addressed. The stroke group asked for no actions. Cardiac asked for data. They asked for the CVD stroke data that was pulled out to be sent to them, and I think that's actually already occurred. The aeromedical group asked for no actions. I had no request. The pediatrics, again, I know you've already heard a little bit about this, but they're really focused on an injury to the child abuse. the coding, and so Lori Vinson from our Trauma Systems Committee is putting together a work group to make sure that we're using the appropriate coding. And they're also asking to see if from the registry we can begin to tag those repeating children that may be signs of child abuse. And so again, the group is looking at that. The trauma group, again, continues to ask for the operations manual guidelines, and so those are being developed. And they also ask for a vendor day to be able to talk to all of the vendors that support the trauma centers and their registry, and then report to the current state registry. So Brenda was present, and so we're going to ask TTAF to actually try to bring all those vendors together from EMS as well as the trauma centers to be able to talk to them about how to integrate the registry and have a better product. I will say that Chris Drucker and his team has been awesome to work with. We have data that we haven't had before, and so I can tell you some stats about trauma. We can actually show you if you want to see them. But our death rate for mortality in the state of Texas was 2.69 for 2013, which continues to be below the National Trauma Data Bank average, which is very good for the state of Texas and the citizens. In addition to that, falls and motor vehicle crashes continue to be our highest injury pattern. They're the highest injury pattern, but they're also the highest cause of death in the state of Texas. There were 3,064 deaths from trauma last year, and what we also know is that not all the hospitals have reported their data, so those numbers may change slightly. So in addition to that, our other work groups that met is Brian Eastridge is chair of our Trauma Medical Director work group. He was not present. He leaves again for overseas today, so keep him in your thoughts and prayers. Dr. Gandhi is going to take the charge for that particular work group. We also had Kelly Stowe give a report on our advanced practice work group. They're looking at the common terminology and operational issues to implement advanced practice providers in the trauma centers. The registrar work group, again, this is to look at the development specifically of the trauma registrars throughout the state of Texas. And then Courtney Edwards gave an update on the electronic medical record. She and Wendy McNabb were challenged to put together a white paper on how to implement an electronic medical record that works in a trauma center. And then Lori, we've already talked about, is doing the pediatric coding. So there were no action items specifically requested from GETAC from the Trauma Systems Committee. The one thing that we would like to have some feedback from you is we are getting lots of data. Would you like to see some of that data presented to you at the formal GETAC meeting? And if so, what data would you like? We can give you fatality reports, data reports, transfer reports, EMS length of time. All of that is available. If you look on the DISH website currently, you can see some great reports regarding EMS. You can also see some reports that we probably should dig a little bit deeper and find out what's happening. For example, one of their transfer reports is reflecting that level 1 trauma centers are transporting to level 4 trauma centers, transferring. And so I think there are some issues there. So it gives us a great opportunity to dig a little deeper and find out what's truly going on in the state of Texas. The open comments at the Trauma Systems Committee circled around funding. You know, we're all very good to talk about the trauma system, the EMS system, the stroke system, the cardiac system, but what's really apparent is that what's a question is that we're very familiar with the concept of the trauma center and EMS and aeromedical, but not a lot of people understand the infrastructure that brings us all together to coordinate that, to collaborate for better outcomes, and to advance our practice, and that is the RAC. And so the question is, how do we work together with one voice to move forward with legislation to not only continue to support the 3588 funding, to support the trauma centers and EMS, but how do we build that infrastructure funding to support the RACs? If the RACs go away, we're going to go back into the world where we had these isolated trauma centers doing what they wanted to do, and the coordination of patient care and the opportunity to really create system advances is going to be greatly jeopardized. And so again, that was the general comment from the Trauma Systems Committee. Can I answer any questions for you?
Well, the question you asked us about seeing data, I would like to see some data, and I like the transfer information. I think that is something that would be good to dig into, because I can see some patients going from a level 1 trauma center to level 4 trauma center, but not for trauma. So the question is, you know, how is that data being pulled out of there? Maybe they're going for a cardiac or a stroke reason. although most level 1 trauma centers could take care of most anything.
Right.
But yeah, I think we should start somewhere. I don't think it's quite as important where we start, but we start looking at the data.
Yeah.
We've begged for it forever.
I'm definitely interested in seeing the, not just the standardized numbers, but the oddities or the trends that make you raise an eyebrow, like you indicated. That would definitely be useful, at least for me.
Okay.
Mike?
I just wanted to add, Jory, I appreciate your meetings, the way you run them. They're very concise, to the point, but you always have educational program with it. You have a lot of information that you're able to get in such a short time. I really enjoy them and appreciate the way you handle them. Thanks for the data. I think that would be helpful.
Thank you. I would encourage each of you to go to the DISH website between the next meeting and take a very critical look of the data reports that you have available. You will have available the Trauma Systems Committee report, the PowerPoint that we use to run the meeting, but there are 2 other reports that are, you should celebrate with Chris and the Department of State Health Services that we have that data. You will find some flaws in that, and you're going to ask yourself, how could that happen? How can that happen in Texas? So to me, that shows the definite need that we have grown to the point that we really need to get that systems PI committee that Jane and I have talked about for years together to start digging a little deeper to look at some of these facts. But I would encourage all of you to look at it before the next meeting.
Jory, what's the status of the Texas TQIP consortium that Dr. Davis, I think, was chairing?
Dr. Davis is continuing to chair that. He was not present at the meeting, so we will have a conference call. The goal is to have all of the current TQIP participants from Texas on that call to talk about exactly how we want this data reflected. As if you're participating in TQIP, you know that we can have the Texas TQIP data from all those hospitals brought together to look like one hospital, and then compare it to the other states as if they are one hospital. So that definitely we want to do, but we also want to ask those participants what level of data do they want to see. For example, if they want to be compared to other level 1 trauma centers in those states, as an individual trauma center, we can certainly do that, but we need their permission to do that.
Of the 33 level 1s and 2s in Texas, how many are TQIP members?
There are currently 14 participants. It's my understanding that there are a couple others that are joining in on that. You know, and so again, those of you who are not familiar with it, it costs you $9,000 to be a participant of the Texas the TQIP product. In addition to that, your vendor will charge you $1,000 to move your data from the National Trauma Data Bank over to the TQIP Data Bank. So it's essentially $10,000 a year to be a participant for that.
Will there be additional costs if this consortium really happens?
TTAF has agreed to support the cost for this year, and I think a lot of that's going to be depending on the outcome of what we do with that data. My goal is for that data to come back for the state so we can all look at it, and every trauma center in the state should be able to look at it and use it for benchmarking purposes.
That'd be great.
The report that we have from the Trauma Systems Committee was a comparison of the Texas data to the National Trauma Data Bank data. So again, that is something whether you're a 1, 2, 3, or 4 trauma center in the state of Texas. So if you look at it, you will see the length of stay. So every trauma center should be able to use that as a benchmarking. So if they want to use that, it's available on the website.
Any other questions for Jory? Thank you. Are you going to do the TTAF report, or did I see Brenda running?
I am going to do the TTAF report. Would you like for me to do that now?
Yes, please.
Okay, for TTAF, again, we did have a strategic planning meeting in San Antonio. We did have a meeting on Tuesday night. I will tell you that we had some what I call healthy discussion. Healthy discussion is kind of like families. We want to tell you need to do a little bit better. And so TTAF is really taking issues and trying to move forward. And so here are some of the things that TTAF is working on. First of all, Dr. Rutledge has already talked about the brochure for the conference that's going to take place in the Lost Pines. And I think if you look at the speakers, Dr. Rutledge, Dr. Wozniak, and then there's a gentleman, Dr. Smalley, and then a gentleman that some of you may remember, Dr. Ed Rock, will be presenting at that. So it's going to be a great conference, a great location. TTAF has also been very active at the Capitol. Dinah was very instrumental in bringing Dr. Zerwas to the meeting in San Antonio, and he sat and communicated with those members that were present about what our needs were. moving forward. And he also gave us some pointers of how to address our legislative colleagues. So again, there's a lot of activity going on. We did have a fundraiser. Wednesday night here, we learned who can dance and who can fall on the floor. That would be me. So there was a lot of fun. But the bottom line is TTAP is continuing to be our champion at the legislative level. That does not mean that you cannot reach out to your colleagues and talk to them from the legislative, but we would like very much to have a common message, one voice as we move forward, and that common message be that we need to support and maintain at a minimum what we're currently receiving from 3588 through the Texas Trauma System. But more importantly, we need to go after additional funding that will support and allow us to grow the infrastructure for the system in Texas. And we would like to call ourselves, our colleagues are going to shoot me, the Emergency Healthcare Trauma System. But the bottom line is we need that infrastructure to continue to maintain our status, but more importantly, to grow where we're at. Any questions for TTAP?
Don't see any. Thank you. And
Thank
as
you very
always,
much.
we thank TTAF for sponsoring the internet broadcast of our meetings. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you, sir.
Next, we have the EMS for Children State Partnership update. Sam Vance.
Good morning. We recently received the national data from the National EMS reassessment that was conducted. Our cohort closed earlier in the year. We are going to prepare a report and a presentation that we'd like to present to the council at the February meeting, if that's acceptable. The other item I have for you is we recently completed our draft proposal for the EMS recognition program that I believe I've spoken to you about previously, but just briefly, it recognizes an EMS agency for things such as having pediatric equipment, protocols, providing pediatric continuing education, and providing pediatric community outreach. We've presented that to several of the committees to obtain their input. I plan on getting on the agendas of some of the other committees in November to present it to them. We would like it to be an all-inclusive collaborative effort before we bring the final product to the council for your approval. And that is all I have. Do you have any questions?
Any questions for Sam? Okay.
Oh, and I'm sorry, just one thing. Ms. Dickerson, I just remembered that you asked at the May meeting to take a look at our new logo, and I will show that to you after a while. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next item is action items, and the first one is EMS patient care reports provided to emergency receiving. Let's try that again. EMS patient care reports provided to receiving emergency facilities as required by rule in Title 25 of the Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 157, Section 157.11, little m, number 9.
Action to assign it to committees?
I reckon so.
Well, shit, trauma needs to be included, I agree.
Can I comment on that? So here's what's happening is we're advancing, and everybody loves this electronic medical record, and it's great. But when the paramedics come and they leave, there's not anything left in many cases for what they did with that patient. And so there are agencies in our region that will tell you you have to go in, log into this database, and pull out the EMS record, that they're no longer going to leave any type of document when they leave the patient. So the question is, that's great. So there's two ways we use the data, right? One is for the actual patient care, and one is to get that report back in and make sure that we're doing all the things in reviewing it and tag it to the patient's medical record long term. This part is easy, and the electronic medical record has changed our status from having 50% compliance to having the EMS run sheets to 98, 99%. That's great, that works. But that patient care at the patient's bedside and that lack of information is what we're asking for. And so there's been a lot of, we don't have to do that anymore. We're providing that in electronic format. We don't have to do that. And so we would like to work with our EMS colleagues to make sure that there's minimal data left for that patient, because then we're turning around and we're trying to call them and find out what happened. And then when we do call them, there's a couple of agencies in our region that will just flat tell you, don't call us again. You have to go into that electronic medical record system at the RAC and get that. So, we just need some help with this. If we're not going to require some type of communication at the patient's bedside when they're left, then we need to remove that so that people like me are not asking for it.
Jory's right. This is a major patient care issue. We experienced that also.
But it's not, they're violating the rule when they do that. The rule has not changed. I actually just pulled that up the other day for one of my nurses. The rule still says minimum information has to be left at the time of patient drop-off, and it specifically says what information.
Right.
So I can actually send that to you if you wanted.
Trust me, we've pulled it up. But the other thing that we're told is, well, we're going to put something in your area so you can pull it up. The reality is, when you're dealing with airway breathing and circulation, you don't have time to stop what you're doing and go into something to retrieve something. So, to me, it's a patient care issue. I may be totally old-fashioned, but if there's not some type of document left, then I think it's a patient care issue. And we've implemented the 30-second rule, which really is great, where you stop the paramedics and say you have 30 seconds to give us a report, and everybody listens to the paramedics so we have a good history of what happened. So I think that this is a coordination of care issue, and all of a sudden one group is saying we don't have to do this is the way we're going to do it, and then there's people like me saying, well, wait a minute, you're supposed to have something at the patient's bedside. What's going on here? So we just need clarification.
Well, this is a handoff. I mean, it's just a handoff like we do any other shift. But it is a rule. But the rule's been violated for quite some time. I mean, not every agency even uses electronic. They have paper, but they don't even drop the paper off. So it just needs to be enforced.
I think I haven't read the rule in a while, but it says the information. It doesn't say how the information gets left. It doesn't say in writing, does it? Because I'll tell you, the issue is in electronic. I mean, we're in a hospital. We don't.
It does say written.
It does say written.
If in a response pending status, an abbreviated written report shall be provided at the time the patient is delivered, and a full written or computer-generated report shall be delivered to the facility within 1 business day of the delivery of the patient.
Okay.
If somebody's not leaving a written report with the basic information, they're violating the rule.
Okay.
It's very straightforward.
This is so refreshing because I've been called a dinosaur by some of my peers and those I supervise for insisting that it's part of patient care to leave a report. So thank y'all. I'm getting a boost today.
So I think this is just making sure everybody knows the rule and enforcing the rule. So I mean, that doesn't solve our problem. We still have a problem.
Yeah.
And we need to address the problem. But for right now, EMS can't say I don't have to leave anything because I'm going to, it'll be in the mail.
We do the 30-second rule too. It's very minimal data, but it's very crucial data. I mean, somebody could just fill out that little piece of paper at the end of that 30-second thing. I think at least I would be very happy. And I can get the electronic thing in 24 hours.
I think y'all were grabbing the microphone. You
can talk.
Sure.
They're fighting over it.
Yeah, I think the solution here is, and this is not just a Texas issue, this is a national issue. Everyone's wrestling with it as we went to electronic data collection. And it's very clear, the full PCR 24 hours later, the patient's home, upstairs, or in the morgue. So it's not helping for that immediate care. So I think the solution here is the trauma committee, the air committee, the medical committee, the EMS committee, all getting together and trying to do this. With the rule itself, it does say when feasible. So you're going to get it. It's in there.
No,
it's down a couple.
It says full report when feasible, but it says at the time you drop them off, you have to do a minimum amount. You can't just walk out the door and leave nothing.
Fully agree, and I think it needs to happen. But I think the answer is the committees getting together, and I think just bringing attention to it might help make it better.
I don't know. I don't understand why. I do understand the whole, we're doing everything on computers, but I don't understand why it's so difficult to leave a piece of paper at a facility when you drop off a patient. We go by our program goes by whatever the hospital wants as far as doing the 30-second report or however they want that to happen. But we also use a carbonless 2-sheet report. It's much easier personally to put that basic information on there and leave it at the hospital. Leave them one copy, you take another. The issue that we've had in the past is that those sometimes end up on in a patient chart, and there's not, sometimes if we're figuring drug calculations or those kinds of things, there may be those scribbles on that piece of paper, and it's really not supposed to be a part of the patient record. They're supposed to discard that once we send the full report, but it's just not that difficult to leave that little piece of paper. So, and I think in the Air Medical Committee we can certainly have that discussion and see if we can't come up with some solutions working with the EMS committee.
I know that maybe it was only one vendor, but I'm sure all of them can do it, that when you fill out the report, you hit a button and it'll fax the report or email the report. And so I'm not sure.
But I just have to say, this is not all just an EMS issue. There is blame on both sides of the aisle here that EMS providers give reports to clerks, to nurses, to doctors, and no one writes it down. So there's that frustration on the EMS side too, that we're kind of like in this together. And as I was saying to one of the groups yesterday, when I first started getting in this game, you would encode, and they said, boy, you're really dating yourself now. But you would encode, you give a report. Yeah. And when I first got here, you hung around, you talked to the doctors, you talked to the nurses. Everyone's busy now at both sides. So I think the committee is the appropriate way of trying to fix this and bring attention to it. And I think the industry will fix it. There are some vendors out there already. You can print out a little thing on a portable printer. There's stuff you can do.
The complication covering different markets is some hospitals don't want paper. Their medical records want them in medical records, which is not accessible to the. So, I mean, you're right, Joe. It's on both sides of the fence.
But again, the state rule is you have to leave something written. What the hospital does with it is a totally different problem. And having done this for a long time, it's not just an electronic issue. This is a problem long before that. Sure. And it was a problem on both sides. And EMS not leaving it, and actually most of the time when we looked for EMS paperwork, it was the hospital lost it. Right. We found out we didn't lose it. There were these large stacks in medical records of EMS reports that just never got filed, and they never got filed because they couldn't match it with the right patient because names, dates, and addresses were different. So it's not we can't just throw all the electronic methods under the bus. This is a very big, complex issue, but it doesn't change the rule that EMS is required to leave a report, and that's I guess that's what gets me and we've kind of seen it. EMS says, we'll send it to you. Well, that's not the way the rule's written. We may need to change the rule, but they're not following the rule.
Well, I think better than the rule, that's just a patient safety issue.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And that's why we're all here today.
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely agree.
I don't see any other council members grabbing a microphone, but maybe there's some folks in the audience that would like to speak. So one at a time, come to the microphone, please.
Kind of have a queue built up. We need to take a number thing out here. I appreciated the direction it eventually went. I agree, it's in the rules. But it is more of a complex thing than following the rules. Because if somebody files a complaint against me, I'm going to tell you, I'm telling DSHS, I left the report, prove I didn't. Because the hospitals can't.
Correct.
And so this is a this is a multi-year, very, very huge, frustrating problem. We've gone from paper to electronic. First of all, we had printers in the ERs. Hospitals didn't want to maintain the printers. So in our region, our largest EMS provider maintained the printers, and it became a nightmare. Their EMS supervisors did nothing but go ER to ER to maintain printers so we could print reports off. Then we said we're going to go to print it on the fax machine. Comes out on the fax machine, along with lab reports, lunch menus, anything else, doctor's orders, anything else you can think of that's going to come across a fax machine. And it gets picked up and carried off who knows where, and then when it's discovered, well, why do I have Mr. Jones's paperwork? Mrs. Smith, this is her stuff. And it goes in the circular file. We've gone so far as to test it. We had a trauma coordinator that was trying to push this issue for her ER, trying to really help solve it. So Our reporting folks at our rack faxed to the number provided by the hospital where EMS patient care reports are supposed to go. She's on the phone. They faxed to that with a single piece of paper, said, give this to nurse so-and-so. She said, they said, okay, it's sent. She hung up her phone, went down one flight of stairs, walked in the ER, and could not find it. Went to the fax machine, gone, vacant, empty. Somebody had picked it up. It never came to her, even though on the instructions it said come to her. Then we add to this compounding factor that EMS is now a part of patients moving much faster out of the ER, whether it's trauma patients, cardiac, or stroke patients. If it takes my medics 5 to 10 minutes to do some type of report, and they deliver that, maybe it's their full report because we've had a long transport time, maybe it's an abbreviated report, we take that off, and if the system's working as it should and it took us 10 minutes, the patient and the patient's chart are no longer in the ER. That report never makes it in that chart after that point. It's gone. So this is a huge issue. The other thing I would like to add to this, because I add to it every time, is that I've been in this business a really long time, like a huge number of you folks have been. But I'm also growing a little weary of continually trying to find new and ingenious ways to get a piece of paper into somebody's hands at the hospital on every patient, knowing that less than 10% of the time it's going to be used by anybody in the hospital for anything other than writing down a lunch order on. And then when we collectively, pre-hospital EMS, go to the hospital to say, we need data from you so that we can take care of the next patient better, well, we can't tell you that. We can't share that with you. So this is a two-way street. And not only, my goal in saying the EMS committee wants to adopt is not only do we figure out how to crack this nut for the entire state of Texas, but we start chipping away at the nut about how do pre-hospital folks stop using the obituaries to determine what their cardiac arrest survival rate is.
Next.
Hello, thank you. I'm Jennifer Gardner, the Clinical Informatics Manager at the North Central Texas RAC in Dallas-Fort Worth. So we have 19 counties, 27% of the state of Texas. We are the largest RAC. To be proactive, I recognized this issue within our own region, and I developed a Plan, Do, Check, Act, a PDCA project. And our first meeting is September 10th at 11 a.m. So we've invited participants from across the region, and we currently have, I believe, 15 to 20 who are interested and will be engaging in this. And what I'll do is set up an educational framework for them to resolve and identify some of these issues. I think some of this stems from the fact that we do currently have a pilot project with ImageTrend at Baylor Grapevine and Grapevine Fire EMS, where they are doing real-time data capture in the field and transmitting that to the hospital, where they can see it on an electronic whiteboard, inbound patient, read EKGs. Some of that's not being optimized, and I think perhaps that we can agree that 157.11 does enclose what we need to operate within, but how can we best optimize the systems to address this? So we're doing that because there is confusion and contention at that handoff communication. So I could report off on our progress in November, and then I think that we possibly would like to close up the project by February at the latest so that we see progress.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else from the audience like to make a comment? Going once, going twice. Okay, back to the council. Which committees, it appear to be a very complex issue, and lots of different benefits by solving it. So what is the council's intent as to which committee should tackle it?
Can I make a suggestion and a request, I guess? Whatever committees need to address this, I would like to see a cooperative effort done on it. We've gone through the trauma program for 20 plus years now, and I've seen it progress so well through the years, and I hate to see us revert back to what we looked like in the beginning and make sarcastic remarks about the other person or the other institution. We're all in this together, and I would just request that it be a cooperative effort and not one that we make sarcastic remarks and try to make the other one take the blame or look worse. So again, I appreciate the remarks. I appreciate the interest in this issue. It is one that needs to be fixed. I guess I'm kind of spoiled because our EMS and our hospital has always worked so well together, and the communication's always there. I can't imagine working in other facilities, large facilities especially, where this communication may not be as readily available, and working with so many different organizations. But anyway, that would be my only request and my only recommendation is go at this in a team effort and a cooperative effort, not one that we try to draw a line in the sand and take sides.
So what is the actual charge? I guess we need to figure out what the charge is before we ask committees to work on it. That would be helpful.
I would suggest it goes beyond this committee, because obviously we're one-sided. We have a rule that's obviously not enforced, but there's also a hospital side to this on a much larger scale. So this would have to be a collaborative thing with hospitals on how they would like the records. Maybe they don't want them written anymore. Maybe we need to update the rule, and I think it goes beyond just our side, because we already have a rule that says what to do, and it's obviously not being followed.
So the charge of the committee would be to revise and update the current rule regarding patient care reports at the hospital.
If it needs to be.
If it needs to be.
It may not need to be.
It might be just working with getting the hospitals to better work with EMS.
It is multifactorial.
Yeah,
I think it needs to be, if Dudley's willing to take the charge with EMS, at a minimum, I think it should be EMS, medical director, and trauma system. Because a great deal of this is within the hospital. Because I agree with Dudley. Oh, and air medical. I agree with Dudley that it's impossible to tell a lot of times if the report was ever dropped off. Because as I always say, we're not, one of the things we're really good at in ERs and hospitals is losing stuff, especially paper. We're very good at losing paper. But we always blame EMS that they didn't drop it off. But clearly there's some EMS that's not dropping it off and are claiming that they don't have to because we're all, electronic, and that's not true, and that's not good for patient care. So I think it needs to be multifactorial.
I'd volunteer too to help if I possibly can, if I don't get in the way too much, but I can get on listserv with hospital administrators and see if it's going to be primarily rural hospitals that I deal with, but see what I can gather for you. It's an old problem.
Okay, so my Aggie is showing a little bit here. We have a rule, so what are we asking the committees to do? Is it not have nothing to do with the rule, and we're just asking them to find a better way to leave a patient report? Is that what we're charging them with? Or?
No, I think it really does. It opens up the question of, is the rule appropriate or does it need to be expanded? Or instead of saying, I mean, if you were to take it the way it says written report, that means sending something electronically that shows up in my electronic medical record probably isn't a written report in some people's mind. But that's actually perfect. I would love to have that.
That's what I would say. You should make that's
right.
What you should write the rule to say every hospital, every EMS has to make it do that.
Yeah, but everybody doesn't have electronic on both sides either. So I think the rule, as part of this, maybe we do open up the rule to say patient information that needs to be left at the time of delivery is. And how that gets done could be different all over. But we have to have the information when the patient shows up and down the line.
Absolutely. And I can't imagine any EMS that doesn't want to follow that rule. I mean, it's not good for the patients. But also, the hospitals have got to share with EMS. How do you get better if they don't? And if they're not sharing with EMS, then how can they ever do any better? I mean, that's pretty basic. Bring me the patients, but I'm not going to tell you what happened to them. Now, I know there's privacy issues, but not in this.
Not for that.
Not for this issue.
Yeah, the rule is actually very straightforward, that the hospitals are supposed to share information.
Right, exactly. So I don't see that they can raise that flag. And I'm sure that they do. They raise that privacy issues raised on everything. But I mean, it's got to work both ways. Now, granted, I favor the EMS because they're going to get me there, and the public does want that communication. But I don't know how. We have no control over the hospitals.
Well, but this isn't us and them.
No, it's not. It's got to work together.
Can I make a comment? At Parkland, we created an email list called Parkland Trauma Follow-Up, and it's advertised for any EMS agency or any hospital that sends us a patient that needs something. So it works very well. I mean, we have a lot of EMS communication go through there, and we'll send them back a copy of the trauma registry profile. So I agree it needs to be a two-way street. It has to be sharing of information. It is our patient, it's not my patient. So I think there's a lot of critical issues and opportunities that we can address.
Well, we just need to take that and adopt it statewide.
But this
Problem
issue,
solved.
I'm sorry, Linda. This issue is bigger than, in my opinion, too, because I've been in the shoes that Dudley was just talking about, being in an ER, and basically you give that report, the nurse writes the information that he or she wants down, and they could care less whether you leave a piece of paper there. We've been doing it for nearly 15 years, leaving a single sheet of paper in the ER with pertinent patient care reports on it. The other thing is, and I agree with him as well, is being able to judge our patient care by the obituary page. You know, we can pick up the phone and call our helicopter service. Depending upon what department in the hospital you call, will you get information from them. If you call the ER, you might, depending upon who the nurse is, get the information that you need to check on the status of your patient. You know, that's 5 or 6 hours later. And, you know, and then, you know, I get this, who are you? What do you want? Well, I can't give you that information. Well, you know, dude, I just brought this guy in 2 hours ago and I'd like to know how well, I don't know that. You know, you could be some newspaper calling. And, you know, I think we could do a lot. And we've been talking about this for 20 years, folks. And we've been talking about it for 20 years. We're still not there. But I think we can do a better job on both sides. Had my rant for the day.
I've had several, so it's okay. Sir, Chief Riley's coming back. Any other comments from the audience?
So we still haven't answered Chief Riley's question.
I know, but he's coming to sit down, so.
I was just thinking about that charge, Chief, that you had mentioned, and I think it needs to encompass two things. And I just can't come up with the word, so I'll spit it out, and then Eric will come up behind me and clean it all up because he's good at that. But it's 2 points. It's really 3. So the first one is, how do we and what do we leave at the time of patient transfer? What do we leave and how do we leave it when it's completed by the pre-hospital agency? And then the third thing that I brought up that a couple of you voiced about is, and then how can we work towards a better sharing of outcome data after the fact?
Why couldn't we could address this in maybe kind of like we've addressed a lot of other things, is the committees that we mentioned earlier look at this to see if the rule needs to be opened up to make a change. And in RAC B, we've pretty well solved this problem in the RAC. I mean, I'm not going to say it's perfect by no means. I know it's not. But the report, I mean, as far as leaving the information, I mean, we have a form that, like Shirley was talking about a while ago, we have a form that's a 2-part form, and then let the committees that we named with your lead decide whether or not the rule needs to be opened back up and made a change, and then let the RACs or let the RACs solve the problem within their RAC and address it within their own RAC.
I'm not an attorney, but I just read this thing, and it has an and or. So if I'm reading appropriately, I don't have to leave. Only if I'm in a response mode, it says here. So I guess if I have another call waiting, I have to leave a paper. But if I'm not in another call waiting, I don't have to leave a paper. So I'm not an attorney.
But you have to leave a report.
As Joe said, it says here, when feasible. But I'm not an attorney, and I agree, this is important for patient care, so I'm just saying.
This is just a basic continuity of care for the patient. That's the issue. And whether it is written, electronic, videotaped, I don't care. But it is a continuity of care for that patient that's being delivered to the hospital. And so how we get there is, I guess, really the discussion. How do we get that information to ensure that that patient has that continuity of care once they're from EMS to the hospital? We can change the rule. So there's lots of different ways to comply with it, to comply with delivering that information so that patient's care continues.
This discussion has probably occurred at 22 different RACs on multiple occasions over multiple years. We all know that. I personally don't think we need to worry so much about this rule. We all know what we need and what we want. I think there's 4 committees, if I recall. Mm-hmm. They know what needs to be done. It's a two-way street. We all know that. We've already that at every RAC also. It's a two-way street. Let them work and come back to us in 3 months or whatever.
I would just real quickly like to offer up one solution to this that I did in my former life at a large pediatric trauma center in a major urban area. I was the EMS liaison for the hospital. I've spent my entire time in the emergency department, and every ambulance service that came in, I greeted them, and I took that information from them as a liaison, and I acted as the liaison between EMS and the ER attendings and the surgical attendings if it was a trauma. Using trauma as an example, if the surgical attending needed information such as was the patient wearing a seatbelt, I'd run out and ask the EMS crew. But I'm the one that got all that information. As far as patient care follow-up, I did follow-up with EMS on not every patient that came in, but if they called me, I could get that information for them. But I did give patient care follow-up on every trauma that came in and every patient that was admitted to the ICU. So that's just one solution to offer up.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm sorry. One of the things I think we need to remember in this rule, we're talking about 2 different things. We're talking about an immediate report, a written report left with the patient immediately when you drop them off. The other part of that is the written or the patient care report, the full report that needs to be done within 24 hours. So, and just remember that we are talking about 2 different things. So the and/or part pertains to the full report that needs to be done, I believe, within 24 hours.
So how about this for a charge, that we are charging the EMS committee, the trauma systems committee, air medical, and medical director to review Rule 15711 M9 to address the requirements for an EMS report at the time of patient drop-off, the requirement for delivery of a complete EMS report, and requirements for sharing of the outcome data of that patient with the EMS service. That may be a stretch. That was I was trying to incorporate what Dudley was saying about the
remove the word requirement and how to improve these sharing.
Oh, how to improve. That's fair enough. Will that work for y'all?
Yep, I would only make one recommendation, is I think we should include the disaster committee in this, because if we don't do it, if we do what we're doing every day, if we're not doing it during a disaster, it's going to be a bigger disaster. So I think their input would be invaluable for this.
Okay. All right, is that okay with the council?
Dudley, can I ask one quick? Do you happen to know which facilities have the most problem and maybe which facilities work well, or which services?
I could probably make some suppositions in my region, in the city of San Antonio and the outlying hospitals around San Antonio. I wouldn't dare to make that guess in the DFW, Amarillo, Lubbock, the Houston, El Paso area. I think the RACs are going to play a key part in this, in its overall success, because RACs are so much involved in the patient care or patient charting process now in a lot of areas. And they are you mentioned about you don't want to see us tear back and forth and go back and forth at each other and all that. I thought that's how we got things solved, but our lead level one trauma center, the chair of surgery there used to be Mr. Stewart, Dr. Stewart, used to say that in their trauma meetings they actually had to identify when they were not being sarcastic. So that's kind of the mode we operate around the San Antonio area, but I think we've got to come up with exactly what is the requirement, what is legitimate today with today's technology, and then probably I would guess that maybe the next step is to take that to the RACs and have the RACs do exactly what you heard North Central Texas RAC is going to do, is how do we solve this in our borders with our hospitals and our EMS agencies? Because I don't think what they're going to fix in Dallas would work in San Antonio, nor would it work in anywhere else in the state. We're going to have to drive this farther down once we figure out exactly what it is we think needs to be there, make sure it's updated, it's right, it's accurate, it's going to do its work that it's supposed to do. Then we turn it out to those guys and let them really, at the boots on the ground level, fix it. That's my belief.
Okay, thanks.
And the only other thing I'll add to it, now that I think the charge is fairly clear, is please keep in mind the rural and frontier EMS services that may not have the latest, greatest sophisticated electronics.
You also have to remember that Dr. Stewart's from Odessa, and that.
Okay, any further discussion on this item? Any other public comment on this item? All right, now we move to the revision of the 2002 document, a strategic plan for the Texas EMS and trauma system. I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Greenberg to kind of outline. Was that official? It was a real big bus.
So unfortunately, Dr. Eastridge was truly leading this, even though he kept putting my name down there. And it's just because it's difficult for two people to do. The first and probably most important thing is to show that we're on the timeline. And I don't know if you have the timeline. There's a document from Dr. Eastridge. To give everybody a little bit of a review of the timeline, back in May, the goal there was just to let everybody know that we were going to start working on the trauma system plan and outline some topics. Those had been outlined. And for this meeting, our goal was for GETAC committees to provide input on the plan development. And I'm pretty sure that's being done and has been done. And that's it. There you go. So I don't know where that came from, but I like it. So if you look in the middle of there, it says GETAC committees provide input on the plan development, August 2014. So GETAC committee agenda, review, revise committee-specific elements. From what I have heard, I think every committee has done that, has looked at the plan. So the next step is, what do we do with those recommendations? I think they're in different formats. So I would recommend that we actually have those sent to myself, Dr. Eastridge, Chief Riley, and I don't know who else wants it, and we're going to have to start to collate that by not violating the Open Meetings Act, by the way. And we'll have to put that together to then bring it to the November meeting, where you can see our goal there is to develop the plan based upon the agreed-upon strategic framework, and review the committee-specific elements and develop specific it says do-outs on, it's not on there, but basically to go from there and to refine the work. Our goal is then through the February and May meetings to get public comment and have a final product in August 2015. So I think we're on track right now. We need to get those reports from the committee sent to the people I recommended, and then in November hopefully in November we'll be able to kind of compile all that together and then go through it again. Are there any questions, or am I missing anything from anybody else who's been involved? Jory, I know you've been pretty heavily involved. Did I hit the high points? Okay.
And just for the sake of council members and possibly committee chairs, I think we need to stay on our timeline, and we may need a couple of extra meetings in 2015 even if it's just the purpose of the committee chairs and the council to get together as we collate this thing. So we'll try to give everybody plenty of notice, but I think it's important we keep the momentum going, and we appreciate the work of the committee so far. Any other comments or questions?
So is there any way, since you're doing it, Dr. Greenberg, that all of the recommendations from the various committees could be broken into, so section 1, what each of them, because I'm sure a lot of the suggestions are going to be somewhat similar on the
Right.
sections, and the semantics, the wording is different, so that before we meet next time, that we as the council can look at what everybody's suggestions were?
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. How does the council want the process to go? Do you want to see all of the suggestions, or if everybody suggests the same thing, do you just want us to incorporate it in the document?
Well, I think that it would be
And
nice
we can do
that
both, actually.
if the suggestions are the same, then all the stakeholders that, or all the committees that have that same suggestion, in a sense, put it, because it'd be nice to know what every different committee's thoughts were. And if it's the same, then that makes it an easy
Yeah,
stakeholder input.
And we can probably do both. If we're going to do this electronically and do it on Guidebook, we could probably take the electronic documents sent in by the committee chairs and put that along with whatever work we decide to do on the plan itself, just to, again, to make it easy for us to all go through the plan together.
I think there's a way in like Word that you could merge
Yes. you
track
can.
changes, and so it'll have each person's suggested track changes out to the side.
Yeah, I don't think all the committees did it the same way, though.
Okay.
For example, I think Education Committee listed what they wanted their changes to be, but they didn't, I don't think he went into the document itself and made changes. Anybody have a preference?
So if someone were to take this document, you would say, change this word here to purple, and that was suggested by Air Medical Directors, EMS, and I think that's what Dr. Beeson was asking for.
Yeah. Okay. But what's more likely is 3 committees say purple, 2 say red, and 1 says orange.
Right.
And then you would want to see all 3 of those recommendations, and we, as a council, we talk about them. So there may be multiple approaches we have to take.
That's why it'd be nice to have it all, this would be nice to have it all in Word so we can see the tracking.
Right.
I mean, you think most of them are doing it that way or not? Or can they go back and do it that way?
I don't know.
I don't know how much work that is involved. It's just easier to see that tracking.
Yeah. Jory, how did y'all do in your committee?
We actually just went through it and we commented to the side the areas that we knew we needed to go back and change. So we didn't change the writing, we just commented on what we needed to change.
Did you put that in Microsoft Word Review when you did that?
Yes.
Okay, so there's one document that can be merged at least.
Yeah, so I think, the comments will get merged in.
That'd be nice if we could get them all like that. That's just so much easier to see.
Dr. Eastridge has that, I guess he sent that to you, Jamie. He has the document.
He has your document? Or, well, I guess he was on your committee, so he,
He led that discussion and he actually did the documentation on his computer.
okay. Well, and I did that in Medical Directors.
Okay.
So that's 2 committees that we could merge right off the bat. I'll get with Dr. Eastridge and see. Well, what we'll probably do is try to do both, merge the documents, but also have the other committee's original documents, because it's going to get very cumbersome. And if we have a specific question, what did EMS think about this, we can go back to their document.
Okay, any other comments from council on that item number 2? Any comments from the public on item number 2?
So, Mr. Chair, thank you. We did not look at ours because there's no section in our strategic plan for disaster. So our only review comment would be perhaps
It's your golden opportunity.
we would like to participate and put some information in there for disaster with respect to the plan.
I think the council would love for you to do that.
And we're not in violation for not having a bunch of meetings and reviewing all the rest of it because there wasn't a disaster section, sir.
Oh, you can look at any of them. I think I had my committee look through every bit of it. Clearly, there were areas that we felt a little bit stronger about. I think your committee can look at every bit of the plan and make comments that are appropriate. In the items we set out in the last meeting, preparedness was one of the areas, and that would fall under all the disaster. We actually took, I think we said disaster preparedness and then decided it should just be preparedness as one of the topics.
Okay. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. And we'll need all your comments and your proposal by yesterday. Just kidding.
I was going to give it till noon.
Till noon? Okay, yep, till noon. Oh, sorry.